Citing sources is essential in any academic essay. It shows that your claims rest on evidence and that you've engaged with the wider conversation in your field. But beyond giving credit where it's due, citations also shape how readers perceive your work. They can make your arguments seem better informed, more grounded, or even more sophisticated. This is where citation padding comes in. The idea is simple. You include a few foreign or obscure academic sources, not necessarily because they're critical to your argument, but because they give the impression of deep research. It's not cheating, and it's not lying. You're still citing real work, but you're using it to influence how your essay is received. That matters, especially when your reader is a professor, reviewer, or academic who scans your bibliography before they read your argument. Imagine you're writing a paper on how nationalism influenced early 20th century European politics. Most students will cite the usual suspects: Benedict Anderson, Ernest Gellner, maybe Eric Hobsbawm. There's nothing wrong with that, but if you slip in a source like La Formation des Identités Nationales en Europe Centrale by András Vizsky, published in French by a Hungarian scholar, you shift the tone of your bibliography. Few English-speaking readers will know this work. Even fewer will question its value. They'll assume you have read widely across languages and that your view is broader than the average undergraduate or master's student. The paper itself doesn't have to rely heavily on Vizsky's analysis. One or two well-placed references can be enough. For instance, Vizsky's study of Hungarian-Slovak tensions suggests that linguistic exclusion was central to the region's nationalist sentiment. Vizsky, 1996. Clean, not overstated, hard to challenge. This technique isn't about deception. You're still citing actual research. The trick lies in choosing sources that are relevant, but not obvious. For example, if your essay explores economic policy in modern Latin America, most people will reference World Bank data, IMF reports, or maybe Ha-Joon Chang. These are high-profile, well-trafficked sources, but there's room for more niche entries. A short paper by Elvira Tamez Torres, published in a regional economics journal from Monterrey, might not change your argument dramatically. Yet a reference like Tamez Torres, 2012, notes that informal economies in northern Mexico maintain resilient consumer behavior even during policy shifts, adds flavor. It shows that you've looked past the surface. Some caution is necessary. Padding your essay with too many obscure sources makes it look performative. A few well-chosen ones are more effective than a long string of names no one's heard of. It also helps if you can understand the source at a basic level. You don't have to translate it line by line, but you should know what it argues. If you cite a German paper from Zeitschrift für Nationalökonomie, you should have more than just the translated abstract. Skimming a translation app isn't ideal, but it can help you identify one key point to anchor your citation. This approach also signals academic maturity. Undergraduates tend to rely heavily on course readings. That's expected, and professors often don't mind. But when someone reads an essay that cites, say, Politique de l'identité et mémoire collective by Catherine Maillot, a French anthropologist whose work isn't translated, they assume the writer has either gone looking for serious research or has exposure to another academic culture. That suggests independence, and professors like that. Even if they don't speak French, they'll appreciate that you've reached outside your bubble. Language barriers play a key role here. English dominates academic publishing, especially in science, economics, and international relations. But many rich analyses never get translated. A Polish article in Kultura i Społeczeństwo might have insights about rural land use patterns that simply don't appear in English-language work. Quoting that kind of paper implies depth. It also makes your essay stand out. If your classmates all cite 5 of the same sources, your essay risks blending in. One citation from a journal like Revista Iberoamericana de Economía Ecológica breaks that pattern. It makes a subtle argument about your effort level, your seriousness, and your range of research. It's also useful when the essay prompt is broad or well-worn. Take something like compare and contrast theories of modernization. Every student in the class will bring up Rostow's stages of growth. A few might mention dependency theory, maybe Wallerstein's world systems analysis. You can still use those. But consider slipping in a reference to Ulrich Beck's German language critique of risk society theory, or Serge Latouche's writings on degrowth economics in French. Not only does this make your paper feel global, it opens space to make more nuanced comparisons. For example, Latouche 2003 critiques Western modernization as a form of cultural colonization, a view that contrasts sharply with Rostow's linear growth framework. That's just one sentence, but it introduces new tension. It shows that you're thinking critically about the source material, not just repeating what was taught. This tactic also works when you're short on word count. If you only have 1,500 words to explain a complex issue, you might not have space to walk through 10 sources in depth. One or two less common references can serve as shortcuts. They let you suggest bigger reading without having to unpack everything. It's a way to show depth without getting bogged down in explanation. You can write, "This perspective aligns loosely with what Calzavara, 1994, describes as a souffrance institutionnelle in peripheral legal systems." That sentence implies you've read continental European legal theory without dragging your argument down. There are risks. Over-reliance on obscure sources can backfire if your reader does speak the language and spots a misuse, or if your citation looks completely disconnected from your argument. There's a line between being clever and being sloppy. That's why it's safer to use these sources for context or side points, rather than central claims. If you quote an untranslated Croatian ethnography to support your main thesis on Balkan history, you might be asked to defend it in detail. But if you use it to add color or introduce a theme, like religious identity or local memory, it can sit more lightly in the structure. In subjects like anthropology or comparative literature, this method is almost expected. Citing authors from multiple language traditions shows cultural sensitivity and intellectual range. But even in hard sciences or economics, you can find room for it. A paper on urban development might include a Russian language source on Moscow's zoning laws. A psychology essay might cite a Brazilian study on group behavior from Psicologia, Teoria e Pesquisa. These show that you've taken the topic seriously across contexts, not just through the Anglo-American lens. Even better, these citations are hard to fact-check. If you claim something from an obscure 1998 Romanian paper, most people won't look it up. That's not a license to misquote, but it gives you room to quote selectively. You don't have to summarize the entire article, just highlight one point. That's often all it takes to make your argument seem more global, more complex, more considered. In practice, finding these sources takes a bit of effort. Google Scholar is limited by language barriers and indexing issues. JSTOR or ProQuest might not carry regional journals. Try university library databases with foreign language filters, or national repositories like HAL, France, CLO, Latin America, or Open Edition. If you have access to a university library, consult a research librarian. They often know how to locate materials outside the mainstream English channels. Sometimes, even Wikipedia footnotes can lead you to credible, lesser-known authors. This strategy won't fix a weak argument, but if your ideas are solid and your structure holds, citation padding can lift your essay's tone. It's a stylistic choice, like dressing up for a formal event. You're still the same person, but the appearance sends a message. In this case, the The message is, I did the work, and I read beyond the usual suspects. It creates an academic aura, not flashy, just quiet confidence. I lost my voice in front of 25 people in a windowless room during a high school debate tournament. It wasn't stage fright. I'd had the flu for 2 weeks and pushed through practice, too proud to skip. I showed up sick, certain I could muscle through one more round. Halfway through my argument, my throat gave out. My voice cracked, then dropped to a whisper, and finally disappeared. I stood there, mouth open, soundless. The other team stared. My partner avoided eye contact. Our coach put her head in her hands. It was humiliating. After the round, I stepped into the hallway and sat on the floor. A judge brought me water. My opponent offered me a cough drop. I nodded, mute. They all looked at me with something close to pity, and I let them. That moment gave me my first real lesson in how weakness can protect you. They stopped seeing me as a competitor and started seeing me as someone who needed care. From that day on, I stopped trying to look tough. I started leaning into something else. The sympathy cloak works because people respond to pain. It taps into something automatic. When we hear someone's been through loss, hardship, or failure, we often lower our guard. That instinct is useful in professional and academic settings, especially if you need to win trust fast. You might think this sounds manipulative. It's not. It's just strategy. You don't have to lie or pretend. Everyone has a story that hurts. The trick is learning to show it in a way that disarms the people around you. Not to win them over with tears, but to shift how they frame you. Say you're in a competitive job interview. You're up against candidates with better credentials, more experience, cleaner resumes. You can try to fight that head on. Or you can wrap yourself in the sympathy cloak. You don't come in bragging about how hard you've worked. Instead, you tell them something honest. Maybe you spent 6 months unemployed after your mom died. Maybe you struggled through school while caring for a disabled sibling. Maybe you made a mess of your first job and had to rebuild your career. Keep the tone flat. Don't dramatize. Let the facts carry the weight. If you do it right, your story becomes armor. People are less likely to challenge you. They don't want to feel like the villain in your narrative. In courtrooms, lawyers use this instinct all the time. A defense attorney might introduce a defendant's background before addressing the charges. He grew up in foster care, aged out at 17, lived on the street. He made bad choices, yes, but look at where he started. That kind of framing changes how a jury sees the facts. Sympathy doesn't override reason, but it shapes context. It puts people in a softer frame of mind. And a soft frame of mind is useful when you're trying to get what you want. The same technique works in academic writing, if you do it subtly. Instead of launching straight into your thesis, you start with something personal or painful. If you're writing about immigration policy, maybe you open with a short story about a friend who was deported. You describe the early morning knock on the door, the silence in the days that followed. It's not a plea for pity. It's a way to say, I've seen this up close. My argument comes from real experience. Readers lower their guard. Your argument slides in before they even realize they're listening to it. People think control looks like confidence. But the real control comes when others stop seeing you as a threat. When they think you're wounded or broken, they stop preparing for battle. That's when you move. It's the soft approach that clears space. Think of how kids argue with parents. Some fight, slam doors, raise voices. Others use silence, downcast eyes, a quiet okay. Often, the quiet ones win. They look like they're surrendering, but they're just setting the stage. They've learned that calm makes people lean in. They get more freedom, more room to move, more permission. One of the most effective uses of the sympathy cloak I've seen happened in a business negotiation. 2 companies were merging. One team came in full force, suits, presentations, strong numbers. The other team opened with a story. Their CEO talked about how she almost shut down during the recession. She told them she'd had to lay off her cousin. Her voice didn't crack. She didn't try to spin it, just told the story and paused. The tone in the room changed. The conversation after that was slower, quieter, less combative. They closed the deal 3 days later on terms that favored her side. This isn't about tricking people. It's about reading the room and adjusting your posture. If you walk in swinging, others brace themselves. If you walk in showing a scar, they look twice. The scar says you've lived. It says you're not just another sharp elbow trying to climb. And people are drawn to that. They're more likely to trust you, to help you, to root for you. Even if they don't realize it. A lot of people fake toughness. They come into a room trying to prove something. They list their credentials, their titles, their wins. But when everyone does that, it stops working. It starts to feel like noise. Vulnerability cuts through that. It's rare. When someone tells you, "I failed at this once," or "this part of my life nearly broke me," you listen. Your brain switches gears. You see them not as a competitor, but as a person. There's also safety in being underestimated. If people think you're fragile, they assume you're not calculating. They don't expect you to make hard moves. They don't prepare for your counter-arguments. In group settings, they talk more freely around you. They show you their hand, thinking you're too soft to do much with it. That's when you start making your real moves, quietly, clearly, without drawing attention. I once worked with a student who used this method without knowing it. She was shy, quiet, often overlooked. On the surface, she didn't stand out. But in workshops, she told stories that froze the room. One was about her father's prison sentence. Another about living in a motel while finishing high school. She never asked for sympathy. She just told the truth. Her essays were sharp, controlled, relentless. But no one pushed back hard. They assumed she'd earned her right to speak. They were right, but her delivery gave her cover. She wrapped her argument in something soft, and by the time readers reached her main point, they were already leaning in. You don't need to invent tragedy. You just need to tell one true thing about yourself that shows struggle. Make it early. Make it simple. Don't linger. Then move on to your argument. That's the structure. The sympathy cloak isn't the message, it's the wrapping. It buys you time and space to say what you need to say, without getting hit too soon or too hard. It's not a shield that blocks everything, but it's often enough to make people pause. And that pause is where your leverage lives. I used to be the one who reached out first. Every time. I'd text to check in, to make plans, to follow up. I told myself I was being thoughtful, that I cared more, that I was holding things together. The truth was simpler. I was afraid of silence. I didn't want to test what would happen if I didn't try. I already knew what it would mean if no one noticed my absence. So I filled the gaps. But one day, I stopped. It wasn't dramatic. No declaration, no decision to cut anyone off. I just didn't send the first message. I waited. A week went by, then 2. The thread stayed empty. I watched the little gray bubbles never appear. That's when I learned something hard but clear. People who want to talk to you, talk to you. You shouldn't have to remind them that you exist. When you always text first, you train people to expect it. They learn you'll reach out, that they don't need to, so they stop putting in effort. Not out of cruelty, out of comfort. They know the connection is safe, so they don't have to maintain it. You're doing that work for both of you, and it might not even feel like work until you stop. That's when the weight shows up. It's in the silence that you find out who's been holding the line with you and who's just been standing there. Think about the last 10 text conversations you had. Count how many you started. Count how many started with someone asking about you, not something they needed. That number tells you something. It's not a full picture, but it's a signal. People are busy, yes. People forget, sure. But if you disappear and no one checks, you've got your answer. Or at least part of it. This isn't about playing games. It's not about making people chase you. That's a different motive. This is about clarity. When you stop texting first, you stop feeding the illusion that the relationship is mutual if it's not. You stop performing the friendship, or the flirtation, or the kinship alone. You let the other person reveal what role they want to play, if any. Some people will show up, others won't. Both outcomes are useful. They tell you where to put your time. I once had a friend I spoke to nearly every day. We shared stories, made each other laugh, gave each other advice. But I realized one day that I'd started every single conversation for months. So I stopped. The chat went quiet. A week later, I saw they'd posted photos from a trip they never mentioned. They hadn't thought of me, or maybe they had, but not enough to reach out. That stung, but it told me the truth. I had been part of their day only because I kept knocking on the door. Without that knock, I was out of sight. We learn a lot about people by what they do when we go quiet. Do they check in? Do they send a quick, "Hey, you good?" Do they wait a while, then poke back in? Or do they let the silence grow because they didn't notice it start? If you always text first, you never let that reveal happen. You never see the other side's effort level. You fill the space before they get the chance to do it. Some relationships collapse in that space. Others shift. I had one friend who reached out a full month after I stopped initiating. Her message was blunt. "You alive?" I laughed out loud when I read it. I said, "Yeah. Just been letting others reach out first." She replied, "Fair. We've been better since." She took the signal. She saw the pattern. Some people do. Others vanish. The silence also helps you sort noise from signal. We all have threads in our phones that feel full of conversation, but they're really one-sided. A lot of people stay connected through habit. They reply when prompted, but never reach out unprovoked. That's not connection, that's reaction. There's a difference between someone being happy to hear from you and someone wanting to talk to you. One needs a trigger, the other creates one. And yes, some people won't notice because they're overwhelmed. Not everyone's absence means apathy, but if you matter to them, they will find a way back, even if it takes a little time. That's the other thing the silence teaches you: patience. Not the anxious kind, but the observational kind. You learn to wait and watch, to let the threads go loose and see which ones tighten on their own. It's easier to justify people's silence when you don't test it. When you're always the one keeping the thread alive, you never have to face the idea that maybe they wouldn't. You can pretend you're just more social, or more organized, or more thoughtful. But if the pattern is always you first, you're not in a mutual rhythm. You're in a chase. And that chase hides the fact that you might be the only one running. Even in romantic contexts, this comes up. If you're always the one texting good morning, checking in at night, suggesting plans, you start to feel responsible for the relationship's heartbeat. But the real test is what happens when you pause, not to punish, just to measure. Do they notice? Do they reach? Or do they drift, happy to let you go? When you stop texting first, you don't cut people off. You open a window. You let air in. You give space for others to move toward you or away from you. And their direction matters more than their words. Anyone can say they care. But who shows up unprompted? Who sends the message without needing a reason? That's who you look for. Some people will call this petty. They'll say real relationships don't keep score. But that's not what this is. You're not counting messages. You're watching effort. You're noticing imbalance. If someone always takes but never initiates, you're not in a partnership. You're in service. And if the moment you stop reaching out, they vanish, then you've learned the shape of that bond. One of the clearest, most honest things you can do is say nothing and see what speaks back. The answer might be silence. That's not easy to hear, but it's real. And real is better than assumed closeness that only exists when you create it. Relationships should breathe on both sides. If the air only moves when you blow, then you're not breathing together. You're performing CPR on something that may already be gone. You don't need to make a rule of it. You don't need to disappear forever. Just stop texting first, for a while. Not to punish, not to win, but to understand. Let the silence grow, then watch who breaks it. A paper trail protects you in a way that politeness never will. People don't always do what they say, especially when there's no record. Verbal agreements slip, promises fade, deadlines shift without warning. But when it's in writing and others are copied, the rules change. That's why you CC people, even when they don't need to act. Their presence changes the tone of the message. It tells the recipient, this conversation isn't just between us anymore. The idea is simple. People behave differently when they know someone else is watching. If you've ever seen a coworker go from blunt to careful, once a manager is in the room, you already understand. The CC field works the same way. It's a quiet way of bringing in authority without being confrontational. It signals, I want transparency here. For someone acting in good faith, it won't matter. For someone cutting corners, it's a warning. Say you're working on a team project and someone misses their deadline. You remind them in private and they brush it off. You send a follow-up email and they say they're on it, but nothing changes. The third time, you copy your team lead. You don't accuse. You just write, following up on this, let me know if you need support. CCing manager's name so they're aware of where things stand. The tone is neutral, but now the missed deadline isn't just your problem. It's visible, and that visibility does more than pressure the person. It protects you. No one can say you didn't speak up. No one can blame you for the delay. You created a trail. That's not petty, it's smart. People forget that when conflict shows up, memories become selective. I don't remember you asking for that. I thought the deadline was flexible. I never agreed to that change. If it's not in writing, you can't prove it. The burden lands on you. But if you have the email and others saw it too, the facts are fixed. You don't need to argue. You just forward the thread. Even outside of conflict, CCing people builds accountability. It encourages better work. If you're coordinating with a vendor and you include their director in the email chain, they move faster. They're less likely to cut corners or ignore your feedback. You don't have to threaten them. You don't even need to say much. The presence of the director in the background is enough. It changes the risk calculation. It also shows that you understand how communication works in your organization. You know who matters. You know who needs to see what. And you're not afraid to bring them in. That makes people more careful with you. Not because you're aggressive, but because they know you're paying attention. This doesn't mean you copy everyone on every message. That dilutes the effect. If your CC list gets too long, people start ignoring the emails. They assume you're just broadcasting. But when you use it with intention, it makes your message heavier. Say you're emailing a colleague about project scope and you copy your boss. The message becomes less casual. It locks in what's being said. Later, if they try to shift the goalposts, you have evidence that they agreed to the original plan, with your boss in the loop. This approach is especially useful when people try to get away with verbal agreements. Some coworkers say one thing in a meeting and another in writing. You can fix that. After a meeting, send a follow-up email summarizing what was discussed and copy anyone who was present. Write, just to confirm our discussion. The delivery deadline is next Friday, and we agreed to prioritize feature A over feature B. Let me know if I missed anything. That locks the conversation into a public record. It gives people a chance to correct it, but more importantly, it gives you cover. If someone changes their tune later, you can say, see email from date. That ends a lot of arguments before they start. People also CC for upward visibility. If you're doing solid work, but no one senior sees it, your efforts can go unnoticed. So when you finish a piece of work, or close a loop on a client issue, and you send your summary or report, copy someone higher up. Not to brag, just to make sure they see the work happening. Over time, this builds a reputation. You become the person who delivers, who keeps things visible, who runs clean threads. That matters during reviews. That matters when roles open up. You're not just someone who works hard. You're someone who knows how to operate within a system. Some people see this as overkill. They think it slows down communication or makes things political. But in most workplaces, politics are already there. People do jockey for credit. People do dodge responsibility. If you're not documenting things, you're playing on hard mode. You're betting on everyone being fair. That's a risky bet. I've seen situations where people got blamed for projects going off the rails, when in fact, they'd raised concerns early on. But no one saw those concerns because they raised them in hallway chats or casual one-on-ones. No paper trail. So when leadership asked what happened, the record showed silence. That's not fair, but it's common. A CC field could have changed that. A simple email, flagging some risk here, CCing project manager to keep everyone aligned, could have shifted the entire story. In cross-functional teams, this becomes even more important. When marketing, product, and engineering all touch the same project, communication gaps open fast. If you're a product manager, confirming a feature spec with engineering, you should also CC the marketing lead. Not because they need to act now, but because they'll need that information soon. And if questions come up later, they can't say they weren't told. You keep people in the loop by design, not by chance. The same logic applies when dealing with clients or external partners. If a client tries to push for a discount they weren't promised, and you'd never put the terms in writing, your leverage is weak. But if you have a record, email threads confirming scope, pricing, timelines, you can push back without sounding defensive. You just resend the email. You don't argue. The facts argue for you. This doesn't mean you weaponize the CC field. You don't copy the CEO on a small disagreement. You don't escalate minor issues with unnecessary visibility. That turns you into noise. The skill is in using it quietly, strategically. When you send a calm message and copy the right people, you don't need strong language. The distribution does the work. There's a confidence in doing this that people notice. You're not afraid of accountability. You invite it. You show your work and you leave the record open. That tends to scare bad actors, or at least slow them down. People who thrive on backroom deals don't want an audience. People who shade the truth prefer private channels. When you shift the conversation into the light, you force a different standard. You don't have to be senior to do this. You just have to be precise. Think like a recorder. Capture what matters. Put it where it can be seen. And when needed, bring in the quiet power of presence, not through tone, but through names at the top of the thread. That's the paper trail. Not flashy, just solid, and over time, it keeps you safe.
One click. That's all it takes to turn a normal workday into an urgent problem. One email sent too fast, with the wrong tone, the wrong name, or the wrong recipient. The email that was supposed to stay in drafts. The one you wrote just to get the frustration out of your system. Maybe it called the new project pointless. Maybe it said something sharp about a manager. Or maybe it was just careless. A reply meant for one person that ended up in a thread of 20. It happens more than people admit. That's why you enable undo send. Most email platforms have a feature that delays outgoing messages by 5, 10, or 30 seconds. It gives you a short window to take something back before it leaves your outbox. It's not dramatic. You click send, and instead of flying off, the message holds in place. A small undo button appears. If you catch the mistake, you click. The message disappears. You get another chance. That small pause is worth more than almost anything else in your inbox setup. Mistakes don't wait for ideal timing. They happen when you're rushing. When your calendar is full and someone sends a message that pushes the wrong button. When your screen is cluttered with tabs and Slack notifications and half-written reports. In that moment, your judgment narrows. You type fast. You hit send, and then you realize you attached the wrong file. You left in a sarcastic line. You forgot to double-check the recipients. If you're lucky, you notice it in the next 2 seconds. If you're not, the damage is already done. But if undo send is active, you get a margin for error, a safety net.
one that doesn't cost anything but protects you from your own worst timing. People underestimate how often professionals send the wrong message. It's not always dramatic. Sometimes it's just tone. You thought the email sounded firm. The reader thought it sounded cold. Or you meant to be helpful, and it came off like micromanaging. When those misfires go to a peer, you can recover. When they go to someone with more power, your boss, your boss's boss, or a client, you start doing damage control. A former coworker of mine once sent an email venting about a VP who had overruled a team decision. He typed it fast and forwarded it to another manager with the subject line, "Look who decided to play God again." He thought he had removed the VP's name from the thread. He hadn't. The VP replied in under 5 minutes with, "Thanks for the feedback. Let's talk Monday." That manager spent the weekend drafting an apology and rehearsing an explanation. All of it could have been avoided with a 10-second delay and an undo button. It's not just about mistakes. Sometimes you need the delay for second thoughts. You finish typing the message. You hover over send. Something feels off, but you can't tell what. You send it anyway. Then, 2 seconds later, your brain catches up. You forgot a line. You misread the original request. You realize the tone's too harsh or too soft. With no delay, that realization comes too late. With delay, you hit undo and revise. The extra 30 seconds doesn't slow you down. It just gives your better judgment a chance to speak. In high-pressure environments, delay send is essential. Take consulting. You might be working across time zones, under deadlines, with stakeholders who aren't always aligned. You'll send dozens of emails a day, many with deliverables attached or decisions baked in. One wrong attachment, one typo in a number, one message sent to the wrong client, and you've introduced confusion or worse, legal exposure. You can't always control the rush, but you can control the send time. Or think about HR. Sensitive topics, careful language. Sometimes you're addressing performance issues, compensation, or conflict. You draft, you review, and still you might miss something. Maybe you've said something that could be misread. Maybe you forgot to BCC a third party. You hit send, and only after do you realize it's not just a mistake. It's a mistake with consequences. If you had a delay, you might have caught it. Maybe you wouldn't have. But without it, you have zero chance. Even on a smaller scale, undo send is useful. Say you're responding to someone's idea. You don't like it. You write something blunt, not mean, just efficient. You send it. Then you remember they're new, or that they'd taken a risk sharing it, that they look up to you. Now your message isn't just a rejection, it's a signal that they should stop speaking up. You wish you could rewrite it. With delay, you can. People say, just be careful, as if that's a real plan. But no one is careful all the time. We get tired, we get interrupted. We multitask. Good tools work even when we don't. Undo send is one of those tools. It's a quiet failsafe. It doesn't require a training manual. You don't need permission to turn it on. And when it saves you from your own shortcut thinking. It also changes your habits. Once you know you can undo, you start reading emails after you hit send, but before they actually go. That's when you notice the mistake in line 2. That's when you see you forgot the attachment. You build a second chance habit into your process. That habit won't fix everything, but it will lower your number of messes. And in a professional setting, that's a win. This also applies to texts and DMs, especially on workplace chat tools like Slack or Teams. Many platforms don't offer undo send yet, but some let you edit or delete within a short window. Use that. It's not about being paranoid. It's about staying clean. People screenshot things. They quote messages. A fast delete can keep something small from becoming something messy. If your platform doesn't offer it, type your messages in a notepad first. Then copy them in. It slows you just enough to catch yourself. There's also the matter of reputation. People remember your worst email more than your best. You can send 100 clean, useful messages, but one sloppy note to the wrong person sticks. It colors how they see you. Maybe it makes them wary. Maybe it makes them think you're careless or reactive. That's a high cost for one preventable mistake. Undo send doesn't fix your whole image, but it can stop you from adding damage to it. At the highest levels, people don't send anything without review. Executives have assistants. Legal signs off. Communication staff polish the tone. But you don't need a whole team. You just need a short pause and a button. Emails fast. That's the problem. Undo send adds just enough friction to slow you without stopping you. In most cases, that's all it takes. A few seconds of delay, a chance to backtrack, and the knowledge that, if needed, you can take the message back before it becomes a problem. That's the value. Not drama, just damage control. Silent, effective, built-in. One of the smallest settings in your email platform. One of the most powerful things you can do to protect yourself from yourself. I didn't have the money. That was the truth. I was standing in a small dentist's office, holding an estimate I couldn't afford. I needed 2 fillings, maybe a third. The hygienist was kind, but the number on the paper was fixed. I stared at it for a long time, then said, "I've had a rough couple months. Lost hours at work. I want to get this taken care of, but is there any way we can make this more manageable?" She looked at me. Not suspicious, just quiet. Then she said she'd check with the office manager. 5 minutes later, they offered a lower price. No form to fill out. No proof of income. They just lowered it. I hadn't made a scene. I hadn't begged. I'd simply placed my need on the table and let them sit with it. That's the guilt tax. It works more often than people realize. The guilt tax is simple. You introduce hardship, not in dramatic terms, not in manipulative language, but in a way that makes it hard for someone to say no without feeling like they're causing more harm. You imply that their standard price will create an extra burden. Most people don't want to be the reason someone struggles more, so they make a small adjustment, not out of pity, out of discomfort. They don't want to feel like the villain. This approach isn't lying, it's positioning. Everyone has something they're carrying: financial strain, family obligations, health costs. You don't have to exaggerate. You just frame it right. You might say, "I really need this service, but money's tight after some medical bills." Or, "I've had a rough few months work-wise, and I'm trying to be smart about what I spend. Is there any room on the rate?" The key is tone. You're not accusing them of being expensive. You're sharing a small piece of your situation and waiting. People don't like to feel heartless. They rarely say it out loud, but the pressure settles in. This works best in one-on-one settings. Local services, freelancers, small businesses, anywhere the person you're talking to has some control over price. They might not always say yes, but they'll usually offer something. A lower rate, a payment plan, an extra service at no charge. You're not demanding a discount. You're making it easier for them to choose generosity without having to justify it. I saw a friend use this with a mechanic. Her car needed brake work she couldn't delay. She told them directly, "I lost my job last month. I'm trying to keep this thing running long enough to get to interviews." The manager didn't say anything right away, just looked down at the estimate, then said he'd knock $50 off. No negotiation, no back and forth, just a quiet reduction. It wasn't massive, but it helped. And he felt better about himself too. The reason this works is human nature. Most people don't enjoy being the bad guy, especially face to face. If you create a moment where they feel that weight, where denying you means ignoring someone's difficulty, they often soften the edge. They justify it to themselves. It's just this once. They really seem to need it. We've all been there. You don't have to tell your whole life story. You just have to put a little strain into the scene and leave it there. But the delivery matters. If you come in aggressive, or if you sound like you're working a script, people get defensive. They shut down. They start thinking about all the other people who've tried to get something for less. So you don't push. You offer a reason, a pause, and a question. Would you be open to a lower rate? Is there any flexibility on the price? Could we meet somewhere in the middle? These questions are soft but clear. They keep the power in the other person's hands, which makes them more willing to use it in your favor. It's not about sounding desperate. It's about sounding human. People give breaks to people who seem real, not to people who feel like they're playing a part. That's why it helps to be specific. I've had some bills pile up since my surgery. Lands better than times are tough. I'm trying to get back on my feet after a divorce. Works better than I'm low on funds. The more concrete the hardship, the more real it feels. And the more someone feels it, the more they want to ease it. I've also seen this work in contexts where the service is fixed, but the extras are flexible. A client might not lower their consulting fee, but they'll offer a free hour or skip the deposit. A music teacher might hold the rate, but throw in an extra lesson. A photographer might keep the price, but deliver more edited photos. These aren't huge concessions, but they show that the person wants to help without lowering their value too much. That's often the compromise they're most comfortable making. In rental situations, this method can open doors. You apply for a place that's a bit above your budget. You write a note with your application. I'm recovering financially after a stretch of medical leave. I have stable income now, and I'm looking for a long-term home. If there's any flexibility on the rent, even slightly, I'd be grateful. That kind of message does two things. It softens you, and it gives the landlord a story they can live with if they choose to give you a break. Maybe they won't lower the rent, but maybe they waive a pet fee or overlook a credit dip. You've given them a reason to bend their policy. Sometimes people want to help, but need an excuse. The guilt tax gives them one. It creates a moral nudge, a tiny emotional cost for saying no. Even if they don't cut the price, they often feel the need to explain why they can't, which shows the internal pressure worked. And in some cases, that leads to something else. A better deal down the line, a future discount, a referral. The guilt tax also works in environments where negotiation isn't standard. A therapist's office, a private tutor, a small design studio. These are places where prices are usually fixed. But if you hint at hardship, they might create space. You don't say, I can't afford this. You say, this is important to me, but I'm managing a lot right now. Is there a lower fee you offer for people going through a rough patch? Most people in care-based or creative work have a quiet rate like that. They just don't advertise it. You have to ask in the right way. Timing helps too. If you ask for a discount too soon, it sounds transactional. But if you ask after showing you're serious, people are more open. Say you've already met once, or filled out a form, or shown you've done your research. That's when you ask, I've read great things about your work. I'd love to move forward, but I'm watching my budget after some medical bills. Is there a version of the service that might cost less? That kind of message is hard to ignore. It's not charity, it's friction. You're introducing a feeling they want to remove, and price is the fastest way to remove it. They lower the rate, and the discomfort disappears. You thank them, sincerely. They feel better. Everyone wins. You don't have to overuse this. Like anything, it works best when it's rare. If you ask for discounts every time, people catch on. But used carefully, the guilt tax is a quiet way to level the playing field. It turns your disadvantage into leverage, not by force, but by feeling. That's why it works. That's why it stays quiet, and that's why it keeps working. We didn't fight. There wasn't a scene. There was no final message, no long call, no, we need to talk. I just stopped being interesting. I replied slower. I asked fewer questions. I said I was tired more often. I let their messages sit unread for a while before responding. I gave shorter answers. I didn't ask to meet up. I stopped suggesting plans. It didn't happen all at once. It never does. But eventually, they stopped asking too. That was the end, and no one had to say anything. Fade out works because most people don't like confrontation. They say they want honesty, but they want comfort more. They want closure, but not if it means crying or fighting. So when something starts to die quietly, they let it. They know, even if they don't admit it. They feel the energy shift. They notice when the tone gets flat. But as long as you don't break the silence with a blunt truth, they're free to tell themselves the ending was mutual, even when it wasn't. It's not about ghosting. Ghosting is abrupt. It's a hard stop that forces the other person to question what just happened. The fade out is softer. It gives the illusion of natural distance. You don't vanish. You just become a little harder to reach. You stop putting in effort, but you don't pull away so fast that it draws attention. The point isn't to punish. It's to exit without the noise. It starts with the tone. You drop the charm. If you used to send thoughtful messages, stop. Don't add emojis. Don't joke. If they text something exciting, you answer with cool or nice. You don't match their energy. You flatten yours. Not enough to seem rude, just enough to make the exchange feel dull. The spark fades on its own. Most people won't chase a conversation that feels one-sided. They'll let it go. If you used to send updates, little details about your day, things that made you laugh, things that reminded you of them, cut that out. Keep replies dry and practical. Answer only what they ask. Don't offer more. You don't need to ignore them. You just need to give them nothing to respond to. People need momentum in conversation. If you take that away, they stop pushing. In social settings, stop initiating. Don't suggest grabbing coffee or catching up. If they ask, say you're busy. Not rude, not cold, just a little unavailable. Then don't reschedule. If you see them in a group, be friendly but not warm. Keep the interaction short. Don't ask follow-ups. Don't linger. Don't give them a chance to reset the connection. You want to make the distance feel natural, like it's the result of life happening, not a decision you made. One of the clearest signals is energy. If you used to be animated around them, tone it down. If you laughed at their jokes, stop. If you used to show excitement when they texted, don't. These cues matter more than words. When someone feels like they're talking to a version of you that's barely engaged, they don't usually ask why. They assume it's mutual disinterest. That makes it easier for them to walk away without needing a reason. Most people don't confront. They wait for clarity to come from context. If you remove affection, remove spontaneity, remove curiosity, they get the message. They just don't hear it out loud. That's the point. The fade out avoids the moment where someone says, "What changed?" and you have to answer. Instead, the change is so gradual that no one names it. One day they realize you haven't spoken in weeks. They might think about reaching out, but they don't, because the last few times felt like work. And most people won't chase something that stopped feeling easy. This works in friendships too. When you outgrow someone but don't want to hurt them, you stop being the one who holds things together. You used to check in, remember birthdays, ask about their life. Now you respond when they text, but you don't reach out first. When they invite you somewhere, you say maybe and don't follow up. You stop being a presence. Eventually, they stop inviting you. Then months pass, and no one says anything. But both of you know. That's the clean part. No fight, just drift. Sometimes the person doesn't let go right away. They sense the shift and try to pull things back. They make more effort. They check in more often. If that happens, you hold your line. You stay kind but non-committal. You keep your responses short. You say you're swamped, or distracted, or dealing with things. They might keep trying for a little while, but most people get tired of effort without reward. If you're consistent in your indifference, they'll back off. The trick is not to overdo it. If you get too cold too fast, it feels like rejection. That invites questions. The fade out isn't rejection, it's erosion. You want them to think you're just naturally slipping away,
not that you've decided to cut them off. That way, they don't feel wronged. They feel resigned. And resignation doesn't lead to arguments. It leads to silence. One person I knew used the fade out after a long situationship. They'd been in a back-and-forth dynamic for months. Never fully dating, never fully apart. The emotional load was uneven, and every conversation ended in confusion. He stopped trying to clarify. He didn't explain where he stood. He just stopped showing interest. He responded when she messaged, but never started a conversation. When she wanted to meet, he said he was tired. When she called, he let it ring once, then texted that he was busy. A month later, they hadn't spoken. No fight, no closure, but the weight was gone. She stopped wondering. He stopped explaining. The fade out is often the kindest exit when nothing serious was promised. If there was no relationship label, no long-term talk, no shared commitments, then ending with a conversation feels like adding drama to something that was already casual. It makes the other person ask, why did we need to make this official just to end it? The fade out skips that step. It lets the thing die at the same level it lived, quiet, undefined. It's not always clean. Sometimes they notice. Sometimes they call it out. You've been distant. Did I do something wrong? In those moments, you don't deny. You just keep it simple. I've been pulled in other directions. Things have shifted for me. You don't need to explain more. You're confirming what they already know. That's usually enough. If they press, you repeat yourself. Not because you owe nothing, but because more detail would only open new conversations you're trying to end. You don't have to fake a reason. You don't have to invent a problem. You just have to stop giving energy. People can feel when something has run its course. Most won't fight that feeling. They'll let it fade too. You leave space, they fill it with distance. No door slammed, no harsh words, just quiet. Then quiet becomes normal, and normal becomes gone.
I wasn't on vacation. I wasn't at a conference. I wasn't sick. But my out-of-office reply said I was unavailable until Monday, with limited access to email. It bought me 3 days of space. Enough to clear a backlog, fix a deck, think through a difficult strategy call, and finally get ahead of things. No one complained, no one questioned it. In fact, the only real effect was that people became more careful with what they sent. That's the trick. The out-of-office message is not just a notification, it's armor. It gives you time, makes you harder to reach, and signals to others that your time is already spoken for. The value isn't in pretending you're somewhere else. The value is in the delay. Most people expect fast replies. The work culture of always on makes people respond in minutes, even to things that can wait. You get an email at 10:47 a.m., and by 10:52 someone's following up. That constant loop makes real focus hard. But if your inbox says you're out, no one expects anything back. They stop refreshing their thread. They stop looping you into unnecessary follow-ups. They move on, or they give you space to move on your own time. You've changed the clock without changing the work. This is especially useful when you're overwhelmed but can't show it. You might be managing 3 projects, mentoring a junior staffer, dealing with a client fire, and trying to meet your own deadlines. But you can't say you're drowning. So instead, you control access. You set up an out-of-office reply that says something like, "Thanks for your message. I'm currently tied up in off-site meetings with limited access to email. I'll respond as soon as I can, likely by early next week." You don't need to be in meetings. You just need time to think. That's what the message buys you. It also shifts perception. People assume you're busy in a high-value way. They imagine you're in demand. Maybe you're working on something important. Maybe you're advising leadership. Maybe you're part of a core strategy group. The truth doesn't matter as much as the effect. When people believe your time is precious, they handle it more carefully. They write shorter emails. They only include you if you're essential. They stop expecting real-time access. That lets you choose your timing instead of reacting to theirs. I first used this when I needed to write a proposal that had to be perfect. It wasn't just another pitch. It was for something high stakes, a project that could shift my entire quarter. I kept getting pinged with minor requests. Fix this copy, check this slide, weigh in on this draft. All of them small, all of them interrupting the rhythm I needed to think clearly. So I put up an out-of-office reply that said I was offline for a few days due to deep focus work. I still checked my inbox. I still replied to the few people I needed to. But the rest? They got the message, literally and structurally. I met my deadline. The proposal landed, and not a single person asked why I didn't reply sooner. The best part is, you don't need permission to do this. You don't need to be on leave. You just need a reason that sounds plausible. Client meetings, internal planning sessions, heads down content development. These phrases say nothing specific, but they sound official. They explain your delay without apology. You don't need to lie, you just need to communicate in a way that sets expectations without opening debate. You can also tailor the message to reinforce your boundaries. I'm currently out of the office, focusing on a strategic deliverable. During this time, responses may be delayed. If your message is urgent, please resend it after date. That last line is key. It subtly tells people that if something can wait, they should let it. It also puts the burden on them to decide what matters. Most people won't resend. They'll wait or they'll solve the issue themselves. This technique works across roles. If you're junior, it shows you're structured, that you know how to guard your time. If you're mid-level, it signals that you're trusted with complex tasks that need breathing room. If you're senior, it reinforces that your calendar is not for casual access. It builds an image of control. Not control over others, control over yourself. That kind of presence gets noticed. It also helps you audit your own inbox. When you know your response will be delayed, you can read messages differently. You can triage with clarity. Not everything needs a response. Not everything needs your input. Some things resolve themselves while you wait. That's another hidden benefit of the delay. It lets the noise clear out. You stop jumping into threads that die on their own. You stop spending 15 minutes solving a problem that vanishes in 10. The inbox becomes less of a task list, more of a filter. I know people who keep their out-of-office replies up most of the time with small tweaks. I'm working on site this week. I'm attending a multi-day planning session. I'm offline through the end of day due to project deadlines. These aren't lies. They're choices about how to frame your availability. And they work. People read the message and adapt. Some will wait. Some will forward the message elsewhere. Some will cancel the ask altogether. You don't have to say no. Your out-of-office reply says it for you. One manager I worked with used to block every Friday as no communication day. His calendar said he was in meetings. His inbox had an out-of-office reply that said he was focused on strategic planning. He wasn't hiding. He just needed space to think big, not spend all day in reactive mode. He told me once, if I answer every small question, I never get to the hard ones. That stuck with me. The out-of-office reply isn't a shield from work. It's a doorway to better work. Some people are afraid this will make them look unavailable or unhelpful. It doesn't. It makes you look deliberate. Most people respect boundaries when they're clearly stated. The problem is, we assume we have to be available to be valuable. But that's not true. Value isn't how fast you reply. It's how well you think. And good thinking needs time. If you want to stay responsive to specific people, you can whitelist them. Most systems let you filter by contact or subject line. You can choose who gets the reply and who doesn't. That keeps your message targeted. You can even set the reply to activate only during certain hours, say 8 a.m. to 2 p.m., so you clear space during your best working window. After that, you go back to normal. No one needs to know how you split the day. They just see a delay and they adjust. The message doesn't need to be clever. It just needs to be calm. Thank you for your message. I'm currently focused on a priority project and will have limited email access until date. I'll respond as soon as I'm able. That's enough. It's polite, clear, and closed. You've told them what's happening. You haven't invited follow-up. That's the structure that gives you room. People often wait for permission to step back, but permission rarely comes. Most workplaces reward responsiveness, even when it erodes your thinking. So you have to build your own guardrails. The out-of-office reply is one of the easiest ways. It's small, it's quiet, and it works. Not because you're gone, but because you've told the world you might as well be for now. I was on the phone with a customer service rep who kept reading from a script. No matter what I said, they repeated the same lines. I understand your frustration. Unfortunately, that's our policy. There's nothing more I can do. I'd been transferred twice already. My flight had been canceled, and the airline was offering a credit, not a refund. I had booked it less than 24 hours ago. The app glitched during checkout, and now I was out $300. I paused, breathed, and said, "Can I speak to your supervisor, please?" The tone shifted immediately. There was no pushback. The rep placed me on hold and came back a few minutes later with someone else. The supervisor didn't repeat the policy. They didn't read from a screen. They looked up the record, saw the issue, and processed the refund. No debate. Same company, different level. That's why asking for the supervisor matters. It changes the rules. Frontline staff have limits. That's not their fault. They're trained to follow process, not interpret policy. They work under systems designed to minimize risk and maximize consistency. That means they're often not allowed to make exceptions, even when those exceptions make sense. Their job is to protect the company from liability, not to solve edge cases. When you run into those limits, it doesn't matter how logical your request is. You're blocked. That's when you ask to escalate. The key is knowing when to do it. You don't lead with it. You give the person a fair chance to resolve the issue. You explain clearly. You stay calm. You ask once, maybe twice. But if you hear phrases like "there's nothing more I can do," or "our policy doesn't allow that," you've reached the end of their playbook. That's your cue. Say it plainly, "I'd like to speak to a supervisor." Don't yell, don't accuse, don't justify. The less you say, the harder it is to argue with. Just the request. That usually works. There's psychology behind it. The word supervisor signals accountability. It tells the person you're done repeating yourself. It also introduces risk on their side. If they refuse to escalate, and you escalate later through another channel, Twitter, legal, a complaint form, they'll have to explain why they didn't pass you along. So most frontline workers won't resist too hard. They know they're not paid to hold that line. They transfer. Supervisors play a different role. Their job isn't just to enforce policy. It's to manage exceptions, smooth conflict, and retain the customer. They have discretion. They can bend rules. They can apply codes or extend deadlines or override fees. And even when they don't do what you want, they usually offer more transparency. They tell you why. They explain what's possible. They act like humans. It's also a respect shift. When you escalate, the assumption is that the issue matters. You've invested time. You've stayed patient. You've followed the process. Now you're flagging that something isn't working. Supervisors recognize that signal. They understand that people don't escalate for no reason. So even if they can't fix everything, they're more likely to try. I used this once with a medical billing office. They had charged me for a procedure my insurance covered. I called and got passed between departments. Every person said it wasn't their responsibility. After 30 minutes, I said, I need to speak with whoever oversees this process. That wasn't even the right word, but it worked. I got transferred to someone who could see the account across systems. They caught the error in 5 minutes. The charge was dropped. Again, same company, same systems, different level of access and authority. This isn't just about phone calls. It works in person too. At a store, at the DMV, at the bank. If someone says, that's our policy, and it doesn't make sense, ask for the manager. Don't raise your voice. Don't make a scene. Just say, can I speak to your manager? And wait. You'll usually get one of two reactions. Either they go get them, or they suddenly become more flexible. The mere mention of a supervisor can change the outcome. That shift isn't magic, it's structural. Managers are judged on outcomes, not just process. If a customer walks away angry, that becomes a problem for them, not just for the person at the counter. So they're motivated to solve. They have more tools, more freedom, and more reason to act. I once returned an item outside the window allowed by policy. The employee at the register said no. I didn't argue. I said, could you check with your manager? She did. The manager came over, scanned the receipt, and said, we'll take it this time. No discussion. No need to explain myself. The rules hadn't changed. The interpretation had. Even in email chains, escalation works. If you're stuck with a rep who keeps quoting policy, look up the supervisor's contact. Most companies don't publish them, but you can guess based on email patterns. If the rep is jane.doe@company.com, the manager is likely john.smith@company.com. Or you search LinkedIn, find the team lead, and send a brief message. I've been working with your team on a billing issue, and I'm hoping you can take a quick look. Something doesn't seem right, and I'd appreciate a second pair of eyes. You don't need to be aggressive. You just need to get your message into someone else's hands. This tactic isn't about being difficult. It's about being effective. Companies are built on layers. Each layer has different incentives. Frontline staff want to close tickets fast. Supervisors want to resolve problems fully. If you're stuck in a loop, moving up is the only way out. It also gives you leverage. Once a supervisor is involved, the stakes rise. The case gets documented. The system tracks the escalation. That makes people more careful. If they say no, they have to justify it. That doesn't guarantee a win, but it levels the field. Of course, you don't escalate everything. Don't ask for the supervisor if you're missing a napkin or waiting in line. Use it when the system fails, when the rules don't apply cleanly, when you've tried the normal route and hit a wall. That's when escalation makes sense. It's not a threat, it's a reset, because sometimes the only difference between no and let me see what I can do is who you're talking to. And when you're stuck in the loop, asking for the supervisor doesn't make you rude, it makes you strategic. I don't remember saying that. It's a clean sentence. It doesn't provoke. It doesn't accuse. It just takes the air out of the argument. Suddenly the burden shifts. Now the other person has to prove that something happened the way they say it did. If they can't, the conversation stalls. And that's exactly the point. Selective memory isn't denial. It's a strategy. You let inconvenient details slip from your version of the past. You remember everything that helps your case. You forget everything that doesn't. People expect memory to be fallible. They expect it to fade. They even accept it as part of being human. So when you say, that's not how I remember it, you're not lying. You're reframing. You're introducing doubt. That doubt makes your opponent hesitate. They rethink their own timeline. They wonder if maybe they got it wrong. And even if they're sure, they still have to explain it again. That repetition weakens them. Not because they're wrong, but because now they sound defensive. Meanwhile, you said almost nothing. Most people don't notice how often selective memory gets used in meetings, especially when stakes are high.
Picture a quarterly review. The numbers aren't great, and someone brings up an old decision. "We went with that strategy because you pushed for it," they say. You tilt your head and pause, then say, "I don't recall framing it that way. I remember suggesting we explore the option, not lock it in." You're not outright rejecting the claim. You're just pulling it into neutral ground. If they don't have the emails, the notes, the recordings, there's nothing left to pin you down. The issue moves on. The pressure lifts. It's even more effective when combined with selective recall of what they did. You forget your mistake, but you remember their hesitation. You forget your delay, but you remember how they changed the timeline. You forget your tone, but you remember their reaction. It tilts the narrative. Now you're not the problem. You're the one dealing with a messy process. The records, if they exist, are vague. Most things weren't written down. Even if they were, most people don't want to dig through old threads just to win a point. They let it drop. In relationships, this tactic appears all the time. Someone brings up an old fight. "You said I overreacted," they tell you. You shrug. "That's not how I remember it." They insist. They quote you. You nod slowly and say, "If I said that, I didn't mean it the way you took it," or "I'm surprised I'd use those words." Again, you don't deny, you just unpin yourself. Now they're the one holding the bag, trying to recreate a past you won't accept. If they keep pushing, they sound bitter. If they drop it, you win by default. The trick is in the tone. You don't sound smug, you sound confused, a little thoughtful, as if the memory truly doesn't exist for you. Or at least not in that shape. People don't know how to argue with that. Anger needs something solid to press against. If all you give them is fog, they wear themselves out swinging at it. They can't fight someone who isn't standing firm, because you're not rejecting them. You're floating just outside the memorial, untouchable. Selective memory also helps in performance reviews. Your manager brings up a missed deadline. You nod slowly and say, "I was under the impression we extended that by a few days based on resource shifts." They frown. That's not how they remember it. But unless they have the task log or time-stamped request, they can't press too hard. You've introduced ambiguity, and that ambiguity saves you. It's especially effective when combined with notes you do remember. "I may have missed that mark, but I remember stepping in to handle the client escalation the week before." That part you recall with perfect clarity. It sounds confident. It's undeniable. So the meeting turns. Now you're not the one who dropped the ball. You're the one who picked it up somewhere else. That shift makes the earlier problem feel smaller. Selective memory isn't just about forgetting. It's about guiding the story back to where you look competent. There's a reason people in power use this tactic so often. Executives don't keep track of every call, every reply, every statement they make. That gives them room to reshape the past as needed. If a deal fails, they say they had reservations from the start. If a project succeeds, they say they backed it early. No one calls them on it because the paper trail is thin and memory is loose. Unless you recorded the meeting or kept exact notes, their version stands. Not because it's right, but because it's uncontested. You can use this in small settings too. A friend says you promised to help them move. You smile and say, "I don't think I committed. I said I'd try if things cleared up." Now they're the one trying to prove a handshake deal. They either push and sound entitled, or they let it go and move on. You haven't refused. You've simply forgotten in a way that makes it impossible to argue. This works in job interviews too. Someone asks why you left a role. You don't mention the conflict. You say you were looking for growth. If they ask about a gap, you say, "I don't remember the exact month I left, but I spent the time refining my focus." You control the story by limiting access to the parts that could weaken it. If they press, you stay general. It's a bit hazy, but I know I use the time well. The more vague your memory, the less room they have to challenge it without sounding intrusive. Of course, you have to use this carefully. If you forget everything, you lose credibility. If you forget selectively and remember strategically, you stay believable. You create a version of the past that fits the present. And when people try to pull you into details that don't serve you, you just say, "I honestly don't recall that part." Over time, this creates a shield. People stop challenging your version of events. They stop pushing for clarification. They accept that your memory works differently. And once they've accepted that, you control the narrative. You decide what mattered, what happened, what was said. The other person can argue if they want, but they're arguing with someone who just doesn't remember. That's a fight no one really wins, and that's the point.
We were halfway through a meeting when the disagreement started. Two product leads argued over whether to build the feature as an MVP or wait until full deployment. It got tense. One of them said, "Shipping early builds momentum." The other said, "If it's broken, no one cares how fast you shipped." I let them go back and forth for a minute, then said, "The problem is you're skipping the epistemic closure loop. You don't even have a known problem space yet." The room went quiet. One nodded. The other sat back. The debate ended. Not because they agreed, but because I'd just dropped a phrase neither wanted to admit they didn't understand. That's the obscure jargon flex. You deploy language that sounds specific and technical, even if it doesn't change the outcome. People don't want to seem uninformed. So when something complex gets introduced into a conversation, they pause. If they don't know what it means, they usually assume you do. And if no one else speaks up, the topic closes. This isn't about showing off. It's about control. Jargon creates an information imbalance. In most group settings, especially professional ones, people hate asking questions that reveal a gap in their knowledge. They don't want to look slow. They don't want to derail the room. So when someone says, "This violates the principle of referential opacity," or "We're outside the bounds of a non-ergodic process," people nod even if they don't get it. They assume someone else does. That assumption helps you hold the floor. The best jargon for this is real, but rare. You're not inventing terms. You're borrowing them from disciplines just far enough removed that people recognize the shape of expertise, not the content. Economics, philosophy, linguistics, systems theory, and legal reasoning all offer good material. The trick is to use a phrase that sounds sharp, but also hard to unpack. You don't say, "This is too complicated." You say, "This rests on an unstable inferential substrate." One sounds like a complaint. The other sounds like you've already mapped the problem and walked away. It works best when the group is already on edge. If people are arguing, they're looking for a way out. They want to save face without admitting defeat. So when you step in with controlled authority, just a few carefully chosen words, you offer them that out. You don't need to convince them. You just need to speak in a register they can't immediately challenge. I've seen this used in legal settings. Two parties dispute a contract interpretation. One lawyer says, "That clause doesn't apply in this case." The other says, "This is a clear application of contra pro forentum." It means the contract should be interpreted against the drafter in case of ambiguity. It's a standard principle, but not one a non-lawyer is likely to debate. The conversation shifts. Now the burden is on the other party to disprove a term they didn't bring up. Most times they don't. They just move on. Another good setting is academic meetings or policy work. If someone's arguing for a specific course of action, say, launching a public health campaign, a quiet interruption with, "You're assuming a stable uptake curve," but that's not guaranteed in a post-nudge fatigue environment, can freeze the momentum. Nudge fatigue is real. The uptake curve idea is common in behavior modeling, but together they sound complex enough that people hesitate. They don't know how to respond without doing homework, so they let it sit. That's often enough. This doesn't work if you overuse it. If everything you say is layered in obscure terms, people tune out. They stop listening. You become noise. The goal is not to sound smart. It's to make specific moves at high leverage moments. You use simple, clear language most of the time. But when things get stuck or start turning against you, you pull a clean, loaded phrase from a niche domain and drop it right in the middle. In marketing meetings, I've seen people deflate whole strategies with a single phrase. Someone presents a campaign. The response? This feels like it's operating in a high-friction salience vacuum. No one argues. What does that even mean? Maybe it's about low engagement. Maybe it's about a lack of relevance. Either way, the speaker sounds like they've diagnosed a structural issue. The room adjusts. You can also use this in design. A team argues about why users aren't clicking a button. Someone says, it's not prominent enough. Another says, the copy's not working. Then someone says, you're missing the affordance cue. There's no semiotic trigger here. That ends it. Now the conversations about semiotics and affordance theory. Fields only a few people in the room know well. The blame disappears. The debate resets. There's also the version where you reference a niche thinker. Instead of saying, this sounds inefficient, you say, this runs straight into what Stafford Beer called requisite variety. Most people haven't read Beer, but if you sound like you have, and no one else calls it out, the term sticks. They assume you're speaking from depth. That assumption silences pushback. In management, this technique becomes a shield. A director once shut down a question about shifting product timelines by saying, we're managing within a bounded rationality framework. There are trade-offs the team is already optimizing for. Bounded rationality comes from decision theory. It basically means people can't make perfect decisions because of time or cognitive limits. But in that moment, it sounded like a reason not to press further. Everyone nodded. The topic changed. It even works in informal contexts. You're debating something at dinner, politics maybe. Someone's getting loud. You wait, then say, this feels like a classic Mott and Bailey situation. That's a niche internet philosophy term. Most people haven't heard of it. The ones who have feel seen. The ones who haven't stay quiet. Either way, the other person now has to argue against a term they didn't bring into the conversation. The ground under them shifts. The key is not to bluff. You don't use terms you don't understand. You don't fake quotes or invent thinkers. You use real phrases with real roots, but without offering definitions. You let people feel the weight of the words. If someone challenges you, you explain calmly, but most of the time they won't, because challenging someone requires confidence, and jargon erodes that, especially when it's unfamiliar and wrapped in precision. So you wait, you listen, you speak plainly, and when the moment comes, when the room is split or the argument gets sharp, you use the one phrase that shuts it down. You don't raise your voice. You don't explain it twice. You say it, then stop. And that silence, that confidence, that control of language ends the debate more cleanly than any volume ever could. The subject line was just one word, re. No greeting, no punctuation, no summary. Just re, followed by a colon. Nothing else. And yet, it got opened. Not because it was interesting, but because it looked familiar. It looked like a reply. Email inboxes work like triage zones. People scan them fast, sorting by sender, by subject, by perceived urgency. Most subject lines are easy to ignore. Just following up sounds like it can wait. Quick question often isn't. Meeting this week? Becomes noise after the third one that day. But re feels different. It signals a thread, something in progress, something you've probably already responded to. You open it because you don't want to look like you missed something. That's the trick. The re-subject line doesn't have to follow an actual conversation. It just needs to create the illusion of one. It taps into a mental shortcut. People are more likely to engage with what they think is already in motion. It's the same reason people read text messages faster than newsletters. Texts come from conversations. Newsletters come from strangers. This tactic doesn't mean lying. You don't pretend you had a thread you didn't. You don't fake quotes or reply chains. You just use the formatting rules to your advantage. Your 2024 goals sounds like you're responding to an internal discussion, even if you're not. Q3 metrics sounds like a continuation of a meeting follow-up. Updated files gets more clicks than here are the new files. All you've done is place the message in a frame that suggests activity. It works because email clients train us to look for context. Think about how Gmail, Outlook, or Apple Mail present threads. Subject lines anchor conversations. If you see budget proposal on a Thursday afternoon, you don't think it's new. You think someone is replying to something already sent. You assume there's a reason it's back in your inbox. That assumption buys attention. Sales teams figured this out a long time ago. The most aggressive ones use even on cold outreach. They don't pretend to be replying, but they structure the subject line to trigger familiarity. Open role on your team gets more opens than interested in helping you hire. The person reading it assumes they might have missed a message. They click to make sure. It's not manipulation, it's momentum. You're not lying about content. You're using formatting to shift urgency. Internal comms can use the same principle. Say you're sending a reminder about a document that needs review. You could write, "Please review the policy draft." Or you could write, "Policy draft feedback due Friday." The second version implies there's already been movement. It makes the recipient feel like they're stepping into an active exchange, not starting a new task. That framing makes a difference, especially when people are busy and inboxes are full. Legal teams use it too, especially when sending clarifications or updates. Contract addendum language feels like part of a trail. Even if it's the first message, it implies continuity. It sets a tone of formality and process. That makes recipients more cautious with their response and more likely to take the message seriously. The same approach can soften corrections. Instead of saying, "Here's a correction to the report," you send, "Final Q2 report, minor edits." It frames the update as a continuation, not a criticism. That framing reduces friction. People are more open to feedback when it doesn't feel like a disruption. There's also a psychological safety in threads. When people think they're joining an existing conversation, they feel less exposed. They don't think they're the only recipient. That diffuses pressure. It also makes it easier for them to reply. They're responding to a system, not just a person. That changes how they write. It makes the exchange more structured, more concise. You get faster answers. This tactic also reduces deletion risk. Many people sort emails by subject line before opening anything. Generic titles get mass deleted. Subject lines stay. Even if the message is light, people open it to check if they're missing context. That 1-second hesitation is enough. Once the email's opened, it's in play. You don't have to abuse this. If every message you send starts with people catch on, but used selectively, on tasks with deadlines, documents that need input, or issues that require focus, it shifts the odds, especially when the person you're writing to skims more than they read. The subject line becomes a form of prioritization. It tells them where to look without forcing them to guess. Even in job searches, this can help. Following up with a hiring manager, application for job title, lands better than following up on my application. It sounds like a continuation, not a new ask. That makes the message feel more legitimate. Same content, different frame. Writers and editors do this when chasing overdue feedback.
Instead of saying, "Can you review this?" they say, "Redraft edits, next steps." The reply rate jumps, not because the request changed, but because the recipient thinks they're responding, not initiating. That matters more than it should. But that's how email works. It even works in group threads. If you want to bring people back into a discussion without sounding like you're starting over, you don't restart the title. You just continue it. Launch checklist updates brings people back without effort. No one has to read the whole thread again. They assume the context is known. That assumption makes it easier to act. You can also stack this with other subtle cues. Include a short reference to a known file, project, or task. Audit compliance doc v3 gets a faster response than "Can you review the audit document?" Again, the format suggests history. That suggestion shapes how people respond. They believe they're entering something already in motion. That belief changes behavior. None of this works if the content is bad. A misleading subject line with an empty message gets ignored. But if the content's solid and the message is clear, framing it with pulls it forward. It gives your words more weight, not because of what you said, but because of what the reader thinks you're continuing. The best use of this tactic is quiet. You don't draw attention to it. You don't explain it. You just use it strategically when you need the message opened fast, when you need the task acted on, when you need the recipient to lean in, not brush off. That's where earns its place, not as a reply, but as an invitation to treat the message like it already matters. A man was yelling, loud enough that heads turned. We were in a small lobby outside a set of conference rooms. His voice bounced off the walls. He was angry about a schedule change. Said he flew in for this meeting and wasn't going to be moved around like a junior associate. I didn't argue. I let him talk. Then I stepped to the side, just 2 feet, and stood near the mirror that ran the length of the hallway. I didn't say a word about it. I just let the reflection do the work. Within 30 seconds, the volume dropped. He didn't stop talking, but he looked away from the mirror, looked down. His tone flattened. He said he still disagreed, but understood the situation. Then he walked off. I didn't win the argument. I didn't try to. I just made it harder for him to keep escalating. That's the mirror trick. People act differently when they can see themselves. It's not magic. It's psychology. The reflection creates self-awareness. Even in the middle of strong emotion, part of the brain sees the image and remembers what the body is doing. When someone yells, their voice gets louder, their posture tightens, their hands move. All of that looks normal when you're inside it. But the second you see yourself from the outside, it changes. You become both the actor and the observer. That's enough to slow things down. It works because aggression often depends on momentum. People build into it. They start with a raised voice, then they lean in, then they use sharper language. If no one interrupts the pattern, it keeps going. But a mirror interrupts the loop without confrontation. It doesn't push back. It reflects. And in that reflection, people see something they didn't intend to share. There's research behind this. Studies in behavioral psychology have shown that when people see themselves in mirrors, they become more aligned with social norms. It's called objective self-awareness. It's the same reason department stores put mirrors near escalators. Theft drops in those areas. People don't want to watch themselves do something wrong. Even if they don't feel guilt, they feel exposed. In conflict settings, mirrors work the same way. They don't change the person's mind. They don't resolve the disagreement. They change the tone. And tone is everything. If someone's yelling in a hallway and sees themselves mid-sentence, jaw clenched, eyes wide, they suddenly become aware of how it looks. That awareness weakens the emotional rhythm. It forces a pause. That pause is where the temperature drops. I've seen this used in retail. A woman screamed at a cashier over a coupon that had expired. She wasn't threatening, just loud. The manager walked her toward the customer service desk, which had a wide glass panel behind it.
woman kept yelling until she looked over the manager's shoulder and caught her reflection. It wasn't immediate, but she stopped mid-sentence. She stepped back, looked at the counter, then apologized for her tone. The issue wasn't solved, but the situation de-escalated without anyone raising a voice in return. That's the power of the mirror. It removes the need for confrontation. You don't have to say, "Calm down." You don't have to tell someone they're being inappropriate. Those lines often make things worse. They put people on the defensive. But standing near a mirror or positioning them near one lets the reflection say what you don't need to. This isn't about tricking anyone. It's about offering a visual boundary. Verbal boundaries can be ignored. Visual ones are harder. When someone sees their body in a defensive posture, arms crossed, shoulders forward, they recognize tension. When they see their face flushed or their gestures exaggerated, they process that as outside behavior, not just internal emotion. That dual awareness, feeling the anger, but also seeing the display, creates dissonance. And that dissonance can be enough to shift behavior. In workplace settings, this becomes a tool. If you manage a team and someone storms into your office angry, suggest moving the conversation to a shared meeting room. Not the smallest one, the one with the reflective whiteboard or the glass wall. Don't mention it. Don't make a point of it. Just relocate. As they talk, they'll see their body mirrored in the glass. They might not even register it consciously, but the result is the same. Fewer raised voices, fewer hard lines. There's a reason interrogation rooms use mirrors, and not just for surveillance. Even suspects behave differently when they know they're being watched. Even when they're watching themselves, it's not about pressure, it's about presence. Seeing yourself reminds you that you're not anonymous. You're not hidden in your own emotion. You're visible, and your behavior is being recorded, even if it's only in your own mind. Parents use this with children without realizing it. A kid starts throwing a tantrum in front of a hallway mirror. Halfway through, they see their face. Sometimes they laugh, sometimes they cry harder, but they always shift. The mirror changes their view of the situation. It puts them in the frame, not just inside the feeling. Not all mirrors are physical. Phone cameras work too. During remote meetings, someone might be speaking harshly. If their own face is visible on screen, especially in the corner, they often rein themselves in faster. The video call becomes a feedback loop. You're not just looking at others, you're watching yourself react. That awareness moderates tone, posture, and pace. You can also use reflection indirectly. Reflective surfaces, windows, screens, metal panels create the same effect. You don't have to be obvious. Positioning someone near a glass wall or in front of a dark screen still works. The trick isn't the clarity, it's the motion. People catch themselves in movement. They see a hand gesture or a shift in posture, and that pulls them out of the emotional spiral for a second. In situations where tension is rising, this tool works best in silence. Don't point out the mirror. Don't say, "Take a look at yourself." That turns the mirror into a weapon. The whole point is subtlety. Let the reflection do the work. Let the person come to the awareness on their own. That's what makes it powerful. It's not forced, it's discovered. It also protects you. When someone's yelling, the temptation is to push back, to match energy. But escalation usually ends badly. It either explodes or stalls. The mirror gives you another option. You shift the environment, not the conversation. You stay calm. You let the setting work in your favor. And in most cases, it does. I watched a coworker diffuse a senior manager's outburst this way. The manager came in heated. She didn't interrupt. She just walked him over to the corner of the office near the floor-length glass. She stood still, let him talk. Within 2 minutes, he stopped pacing. He stood straighter. He said, "I'm sorry, this isn't your fault." She nodded. He walked out. She never raised her voice. She never told him to settle down. She just changed the angle. That's how the mirror works. Quietly, visually, without confrontation. It doesn't end the conflict, but it often ends the performance. Once someone sees themselves acting out, They have to decide what kind of person they want to be. Most don't want to be the one yelling at their own face. That's why it works. He finished his sentence, leaned back, and folded his arms. He thought he'd made his point. I nodded once, said nothing, and looked at him. Not in a way that challenged him. Just still, calm. The silence stretched for 2 seconds. Then 4. His eyes flicked away. He adjusted his seat. Then he exhaled and added, "And honestly, that's not the only reason. I think I'm just not confident in the numbers." That was the real answer. Most people aren't trained to handle silence, especially after they've made a statement. They expect a response, a nod, a counterpoint, a new question. When none comes, the pressure builds. In that pause, they start to hear their own words differently. The brain fills the gap, and to break the tension, they speak again. What comes next is often unfiltered. It's rarely rehearsed. That's when you hear what they actually think, not what they plan to say. The pause is simple. You wait. You don't rush to fill the space. You let it sit, not because you're stalling, but because you're giving the other person room to move. Most people aren't used to that. In normal conversations, replies come fast. The rhythm is tight. One person stops, the other jumps in. That pattern keeps things safe. The pause breaks it. It doesn't feel natural, and that's exactly why it works. This technique is especially useful in interviews. Ask a candidate about a mistake they've made. They give a clean answer, something polished, rehearsed. "We missed the deadline because the client changed scope." You nod. You stay quiet. 3 seconds go by. They look up. "Well, and we didn't push back hard enough. That was on me." That second part doesn't come without the pause. It comes because of it. In performance reviews, you ask an employee how they think the last project went. They say, "Pretty well, we hit the targets." You pause. You don't agree. You don't disagree. You just let it hang. They fidget. Then say, "I mean, it was messy. We got there, but we probably missed some learning along the way." That honesty doesn't surface when the pace is fast. It comes when there's space to feel the weight of the words. Negotiation is another place where the pause holds power. You make an offer. They counter. You pause. No reaction. They start justifying. "Well, I mean, we could maybe shift scope if budget's tight. That number isn't locked." The silence made them think they'd overplayed. You didn't have to say a word. It works even when you're the one asking the question. You ask, "Why did the client leave?" They say, "It was budget." You nod slowly. Stay quiet. 5 seconds. There was also a breakdown in communication. We stopped checking in regularly. There it is. The thing they weren't going to say until the pause pulled it out. The key is to stay steady. Don't look impatient. Don't look pleased. Don't break the silence with body language. Just wait. Most people will start talking again within 7 seconds. If they don't, you haven't lost anything. The silence doesn't hurt your position. It strengthens it. It shows that you're listening, not rushing. That you're comfortable letting the moment unfold. That control shifts the energy in the room. In conflict, the pause is sharper. Someone makes a jab. You pause. They expect you to snap back. You don't. You hold eye contact, but you don't react. The silence is a mirror. They start to hear themselves. Sometimes they walk it back. Sometimes they try again, softer. The pause gives them a chance to correct themselves without being forced to. That keeps things from escalating. In client work, you ask about their goals. They say, "We just want to grow." You say nothing. They think you didn't get it. Like, double our user base in 6 months. Still quiet. And maybe improve retention. We've had drop-off at week 2. Now you've got real data. You didn't ask 3 times. You just waited. The client filled in the blanks. It also works when someone gives bad news. You hear the issue. You don't react. You sit in it. They often start explaining. Explaining leads to context. Context leads to root cause. Root cause leads to a fix. But only if you don't interrupt the flow. Only if you don't rush to say, "It's okay," or "we'll figure it out." Sometimes the most generous thing you can give is space to keep speaking. This doesn't mean playing games. You're not trying to trap people. You're trying to create room for truth. Truth needs space. It rarely fits inside the first answer. That answer is filtered, polite, defensive, rehearsed. The pause breaks that surface. It lets people hear the edge of what they're not saying. Then, they either double down or open up. Either way, you learn more than you would by speaking too soon. People sometimes ask, what if they don't say anything? Then they don't. That's fine, you move on. But the silence still mattered. It showed you don't fill every gap. It showed you can handle weight. That changes how people read you. You're not reactive, you're composed. In high-stakes conversations, that steadiness becomes a signal. It tells the other person they can't rush you, can't fluster you, can't steer you with tempo alone. In depositions, lawyers use this constantly. A witness answers, the lawyer waits, the witness starts fidgeting. Then they say something else, something they weren't asked. That's where the useful details are. The second layer. It's not manipulation, it's patience. The truth often shows up last. You don't need special training to do this. You just need to resist the urge to jump in. It's hard. Silence feels like a gap you're supposed to fill, but that gap is useful. It's the place where other people show themselves, and when they do, you don't have to dig. You just have to listen. One-on-one conversations are the easiest place to start. A peer vents about a difficult meeting. You nod, then pause. They keep talking. They go from surface frustration to real worry. It's not just the meeting. I don't know where I stand with that team. Now you know what's actually wrong. You didn't get that by asking 10 questions. You got it by not asking the next one too fast. The pause doesn't always produce a revelation. Sometimes it just gives people a moment to breathe. That's worth something too. In a world of fast replies and tight threads, space is rare. When you give it, people feel it. They notice, and they often respond, not because you pushed, but because you didn't. I had parked in the wrong section. Not wildly wrong, just 2 rows over from where staff were supposed to leave their cars. No sign said not to. The lines weren't painted any different, but I'd crossed an invisible line in a company lot, and someone noticed. I came back after lunch to a folded warning slip under my wiper and an email from building operations. It was stiff. Please ensure you park only in designated staff areas. Repeat violations may be reported to your manager. I didn't reply with an apology. I replied with a question. I said, "Thanks for flagging. I wasn't aware that the row I used was off limits. Could you clarify which signage marks the boundary for staff parking?" That was it. No guilt, no story. Just a light push on the idea that maybe the rule wasn't that clear to begin with. The reply came back short and polite. Noted, the outer 3 rows are for staff. I've attached the map for your reference. No worries if it was unclear. And that was the end of it. No follow-up, no escalation, no warning on file. That's how you plead ignorance, not guilt. You don't say, "I'm sorry, I shouldn't have." You say, "I didn't realize." You shift the framing. In most systems, corporate, bureaucratic, institutional, intent matters more than impact. Mistakes are tolerated. Malice isn't. If someone believes you meant to break a rule, they assume it'll happen again. If they believe you didn't know, they'll explain the rule. That difference saves careers. This works because most systems are built to forgive incompetence. They have protocols, not vendettas. If you show you didn't understand the rule, the system kicks into training mode. You get correction, not punishment. But if you admit you knew and broke it anyway, the response shifts. Now you're treated as a liability. Say you miss a filing deadline, not by weeks, just a day. The default response might be to apologize fully. "I know the form was due Friday. I just got behind." That sounds honest. It's also a mistake, because now you've admitted you knew the rule and ignored it. A better line is, "I didn't realize the deadline was hard-coded to the last Friday of the month."
That won't happen again. You haven't denied fault. You've denied intent. That's enough to move the response from disciplinary to instructional. In regulated work, this difference is even more important. Think compliance, finance, HR. If you make an error and someone flags it, you say, "That wasn't clear from the protocol I reviewed." Not, "I knew, but I thought it was fine." That second version puts you on the hook. It suggests you weighed the rule and chose to break it. The first version leaves room for process failure. Maybe the documentation was vague. Maybe onboarding skipped it. The moment you introduce ambiguity about what you knew, the enforcement softens. I've seen this used in security breaches. An employee accessed a folder they weren't supposed to. Nothing malicious, just curiosity, or maybe outdated permissions. When asked, they said, "I thought I had access. The system didn't restrict me, and it wasn't marked as confidential." That diffused it. The issue became one of labeling and system design. Had they said, "I know it was off limits, but I just wanted to check one detail," they'd have triggered a formal review. Same action, different story, different result. In conversation, pleading ignorance keeps things neutral. A coworker says, "I thought you weren't supposed to send that file outside the team." You say, "Oh, I didn't realize that was team restricted. I'll fix it." You don't add more. Don't make excuses. Don't ask if it's a big deal. The less you say, the harder it is to build a case against you. You've acknowledged the rule, but not the intent to break it. This approach isn't about being dishonest. It's about understanding how systems respond to risk. If someone sees you as careless, they correct you. If they see you as willfully non-compliant, they contain you. The line between those two categories often comes down to a sentence. "I didn't know" is light. "I knew but did it anyway" is heavy. You choose which version of the story gets told. Even in social settings, this plays out. Show up late to a formal event and someone says, "We started at 6. Don't say, "Yeah, I figured you'd run late." Say, "Oh, I thought the invite said 6:30. That's on me." You take the blame, but not the intent. The difference keeps the moment small. They correct, you nod, everyone moves on. This also shows up in policy disputes. A client says, "We were told the report would include market segmentation." If you left it out, don't say, "Yes, we decided not to include it." That sounds like you made a choice in defiance of expectation. Instead, "I didn't realize that was a priority on your side. I can adjust the scope." That version keeps the relationship clean. It suggests a communication gap, not a breach. Sometimes the rule really is clear. You knew it, you broke it. The smart move is still to ask for clarification. Not because you're lying, but because it opens the door to a fix. You say, "I thought the timing was flexible because the last 2 submissions were accepted past deadline. Should I assume this quarter is different?" That gives the other person room to reframe the rule without slapping you with blame. It lets them explain, not punish. You can also use this to soften power dynamics. If you're new in a space or lower in hierarchy, you can lean into uncertainty to diffuse tension. "Sorry, I'm still learning how these requests get routed. I sent it the way I thought made sense." That signals humility, not resistance. The correction will come, but without edge. Most people don't enjoy enforcing rules. They'll forgive quickly if you give them a story that lets them be helpful, not punitive. This only works if you stay calm. Don't flinch. Don't over-apologize. Don't narrate your learning process. Just acknowledge the gap and pivot. "Didn't know, wasn't clear, thought it applied differently." These aren't excuses. They're exits. They give the other side a graceful way to reset without escalation. The power in this tactic is that it buys you time. It resets the scene. It takes the heat out of the moment. That window, 3 seconds of calm, often decides whether something becomes a mark on your record or a footnote. Systems don't want to process intent. It's messy. It takes time. So when you make the story about confusion, not defiance, you make it easier for everyone to move on, including you. I once filled out a permit form with 2 facts and a dozen guesses. It was for a temporary loading zone,
a process I had never gone through before. The city website was vague. The form was worse. Half acronyms, half empty boxes asking for applicant category code, temporary impact radius, and adjacent structure designation. I didn't know what any of that meant, but I filled it out like I did. I checked boxes. I wrote numbers. I made up reasonable entries. And 3 days later, the permit came through. No questions asked. That's confident bullshit. Not fraud. Not invention from thin air. Just clean, assertive answers in systems that aren't built to catch you unless you flag yourself. Bureaucracies don't reward honesty. They reward neatness. A messy, hesitant form looks like work. A complete, confident form looks like it's already been handled. The truth is, most systems aren't equipped to vet everything. They're designed to scan for problems, red flags, empty fields, conflicting numbers, missed attachments. If your form sails through those checks, it often lands on someone's desk with a rubber stamp waiting. The person reviewing it isn't thinking about you. They're thinking about their own backlog. If nothing looks wrong, they move on. You get approved, not because you were right, but because you didn't stand out. You don't need to lie. You just need to stop broadcasting doubt. Uncertainty is what gets you flagged. When people write NA on every third line, or scribble "not sure," or leave whole sections blank, they're sending a message, I don't know what I'm doing. That makes someone look closer. That makes someone ask questions. And the minute a bureaucrat has to ask a question, they pause your application. Then it sits. Or worse, they reject it because they'd rather deny than explain. But if you look like you know the rules, you get treated like you do. Forms aren't legal declarations until they're notarized or verified. Before that, they're guesses in clean ink. So treat them that way. Fill them out with confidence. Use plausible terms. Borrow phrasing from nearby instructions. If they ask for a business subtype and you don't know yours, look at other examples. Choose one that fits close enough. They're not grading you, they're sorting you. This works especially well in academic and institutional systems. Universities, grant boards, public agencies, they all run on paperwork. They want the form complete. They don't want your life story. They want drop-downs selected, checkboxes marked, codes that match someone else's list. If you use their language, they rarely challenge you. Even when your answers aren't perfect, they go through. I saw this happen with a grant application. A colleague of mine was applying for a small research fund. The form asked for her methodological framework alignment. She didn't have one, not formally. So she wrote, "Mixed methods approach anchored in participatory action research with emphasis on community-centered data design." She hadn't studied that phrase. She'd read it in another grant proposal online. But she wrote it like she owned it. She got the grant. That's what confident bullshit looks like. Not pretending to be an expert, but acting like one long enough to get past the gate. And the gate is often low, because the person reading your form isn't trying to fail you. They're trying to get through their pile. If you make their job easier, they'll do you the same favor. You write the kind of form they expect to see, the kind that doesn't slow them down. That's what gets processed. Not the one with the most detail, the one with the least friction. You also don't over-explain. When a form asks for your previous relevant experience, you don't write an essay. You list 3 items in bullet form. Don't describe, don't qualify, just use clean titles. Site Logistics Coordination, Q2 2023. Vendor Negotiation, Seasonal Program. Outreach Liaison, District 4. Even if those roles were informal or internal, name them like they're real. Because once you write them like they are, they are. No one checks unless you give them a reason to. People get tripped up because they think someone's watching. They write like there's a panel behind the curtain. But most of the time, it's a temp staffer with a checkbox sheet. They don't know your field. They don't care about your process. They just want forms that feel finished. So finish yours. Even if you don't know every detail, pick a version that makes sense and stick to it. The worst outcome is someone asking you to clarify. The best is they never ask. I filled out tax forms where I didn't understand half the terms, but I selected the default category for freelancers, entered round numbers, and matched what I saw on a friend's form. Never got audited. I know someone who applied for a zoning variance and made up the projected utility load from a guess based on their last electric bill. Approved in 10 days. Not because it was accurate, because it was formatted correctly. The other side of this is speed. When you wait too long trying to figure out the perfect answer, the window closes. Bureaucracies have deadlines. They're bad at flexibility. If your form is late, it's over. If it's early and clean, it's in. Most people lose opportunities not because they were wrong, but because they were slow. Confidence moves faster. It doesn't wait for perfect. It submits on time and edits later if asked. You don't need to understand the whole system, just one layer ahead. Enough to fill the form without drawing questions. Enough to sound like you belong. That's what bureaucracies respond to. Familiar structure, familiar tone, the illusion of certainty. This works until someone asks you in person. Then you shift. You say, "That's how I understood it at the time." Happy to adjust if needed. You don't defend, you adapt. But 9 times out of 10, no one asks because your form didn't trigger the alarm. You played the game like you'd played before. Confident bullshit isn't recklessness. It's calculated bluffing within soft boundaries. You're not falsifying data. You're completing fields with enough authority that no one double checks. Because most systems don't check, they screen. If your answers look good, you're through. So you learn the pattern, you copy structure, you match tone, you never leave blanks. You write like someone who's done this 10 times before, even if it's your first, especially if it's your first. Because the difference between experience and confidence, on paper, is formatting. And most reviewers don't read beyond that. He looked up from his laptop, smiled, and said, "Sorry, I'm not too familiar with how procurement works on your end. Can you walk me through it?" The vendor relaxed. You could see it in his shoulders. He leaned forward and started explaining. He used plain language. He talked fast. And somewhere in the middle of that ramble, he gave up more than he realized. He said the timeline was mostly just internal padding. He said the price wasn't locked. He said the last client had asked for the same thing and gotten a better deal. All because the guy across the table played dumb. Pretending not to know something is one of the oldest strategies in negotiation, but it works best when no one sees it coming. People are trained to defend themselves against someone who challenges them. They are not trained to hold the line against someone who just wants help understanding. That shift, when you drop your status just enough to let someone feel smarter than you, opens a window. And people say more when they feel like they're leading the room. It's not manipulation. You're not lying. You're choosing not to display what you know. You're letting the other person believe they have the edge. That belief makes them overconfident. Overconfidence makes people explain more than they should. They correct you. They add examples. They fill in blanks you left open on purpose. That's where the good stuff lives. I've seen lawyers do this in depositions. A witness gives a short answer. The lawyer tilts their head and asks, "Sorry, I'm not clear. What does that term mean in your industry?" The witness explains, then keeps talking, then adds a detail they didn't intend to. Now it's on the record, and the lawyer didn't challenge them once, just listened. This strategy works in meetings too. You might be the most experienced person at the table, but if you lead with that, people go quiet. They measure their words, they protect their position. Instead, you ask something soft. "How did you come to that number?" Not in a sharp tone, not with suspicion, just curious, maybe even a little unsure. Let them fill the silence. They'll often say too much. "We just used last year's budget and added 10%. Now you know there's no model behind the numbers." That tells you where to press. Later. I had a friend who worked in compliance for a bank. His job was to understand complex deal structures and spot risk. But in conversation, he never let on how much he knew. He'd meet with traders, analysts, outside counsel, and start by asking what looked like basic questions. "Walk me through the mechanics here." So, who approves that piece again? People thought he was just trying to get up to speed, so they told him everything, even parts they should have kept tight. And when something didn't line up, he'd circle back, not by accusing, but by asking one more quiet question that made it clear he'd been paying attention all along. That's the trick. You don't stay dumb. You start there, just long enough to open a door. Then you listen. You don't interrupt. You let the other person talk. You nod. You ask a second question, maybe one that's just a little too simple. That's when people really start filling in the blanks. They stop trying to win. They start trying to teach. And when someone's trying to teach you, they forget they're also showing their hand. In hiring, this plays out all the time. A candidate comes in hot. Big resume, big energy. They want to impress, so you let them. You say, "I haven't used that platform much. How would you set up a campaign?" They launch into a breakdown, and if you know what you're listening for, you'll spot gaps fast. They'll gloss over steps. They'll exaggerate. They might even contradict themselves. You catch it all without ever challenging them. Because the moment you challenge them, they would have switched into defense mode. But you never gave them a reason. In sales, this is a way to uncover what really matters to a client. You don't pitch the product. You ask about their pain points. And when they give surface answers, you ask again. "Can you explain that a little more? I'm not quite following. Why is that a bottleneck?" Those questions sound soft, but they lead to truth. Eventually, they'll tell you the real reason they need the deal. Maybe it's internal politics. Maybe it's timing. Maybe it's a number they're under pressure to hit. Once they say that out loud, they've given you the map. This tactic even works in everyday conversations. You're talking to someone who's guarded. Maybe they're a little cocky. Maybe they're trying to control the room. You don't match them. You go the other way. You act like you're just trying to keep up. You ask small questions. You listen hard. Most people aren't built to resist that. If they think they're smarter than you, they talk. And the more they talk, the more you learn. The key is delivery. You don't overdo it. If you ask too many basic questions, it gets suspicious. People start to wonder if you're baiting them. But if you mix it in, just a few well-placed gaps, they'll lean in. They'll explain. They'll want to help you understand. And in that moment, they forget to guard their position. You also don't use it everywhere. If you're in a room where your credibility is the reason you were invited, don't underplay it. But if you're gathering information, if you're testing someone, if you're trying to see how deep the other side's knowledge really runs, then playing slightly behind the curve gives you control. You're not competing, you're collecting. I've seen executives do this in vendor demos. They act like they don't know the product space. So how does your backend compare to others? The vendor talks big, glosses over details. That's when the executive asks a surgical follow-up. The vendor stutters. Now the dynamic flips, because the person who looked like they didn't know much now clearly does. The vendor showed their full hand, and the executive never had to show theirs. This move takes discipline. Most people want to show what they know. They want to be right. They want to win the moment. But the win comes later. You collect. You listen. You ask like you don't know. Then when the moment's right, you move. Quietly, clearly, without having given anything away. That's dumb like a fox, not slow. Not naive, just patient and sharp underneath. He barely raised his voice, but everyone stopped talking. We were in a meeting room built for 30, half full. One guy had been pacing while making his pitch. A woman was checking her phone. Someone else kept adjusting their chair, loudly. The man at the head of the table, who had said almost nothing all day, leaned forward, placed his hands flat on the table, and said, "Let's go back to the original language in section 4. That was it. No emphasis, no change in pitch, just low, even volume and clear direction. And yet, the room shifted. The talkers stopped. The phones dropped. People listened. That's the Librarian Method. Speak softly, and people lean in. You create presence, not by dominating space,
but by pulling others into it. Loud voices push people back. Quiet ones pull them closer. The person who shouts commands attention by force. The one who whispers owns it by contrast. And in rooms full of noise, contrast gets noticed. This isn't about meekness. It's not about shyness. It's about control. Speaking softly says, "I don't need volume to be heard." That confidence radiates. When you speak like that, people start assuming you know something they don't. You sound like you've already thought through what you're saying. You sound like you're choosing your words, not rushing to fill space. That makes people listen. Think of the librarian, not the caricature, the real kind. Someone who can answer your question with 3 words. Someone who doesn't talk fast, but makes every sentence land. They don't raise their voice. They don't compete with your energy. They lower it. They bring you into their rhythm. That's how authority works when it's built on certainty instead of volume. You can use this anywhere. You're in a group conversation. Someone's rambling. Someone else keeps interrupting. You wait. When it's your turn, you don't match their energy. You drop it. You say, "Here's the part that doesn't add up for me." Quiet, measured, then silence. They fill it, or they pause. Either way, they shift. Now the room's tempo is yours. This also works in negotiation. You're sitting across from someone who wants you to raise your price or cut your rate. They talk fast, they escalate. You answer slowly. "We're already at the number I'm comfortable with." You say it once, softly, then nothing. No defense, no explanation, just calm. That pause does the work. The silence after a soft statement carries more pressure than a loud one ever could, because now they have to decide whether to break it. People confuse volume with clarity. They think being heard means being loud. But most important things aren't shouted. They're delivered quietly, at a pace that makes people stop and follow. You walk into a meeting with 20 people, and if you speak at half the volume of everyone else, they'll notice. Not right away, but after the second sentence, they'll stop talking to hear the third. The Librarian Method also signals that you're not reacting, that you're observing. When someone yells in a meeting and you reply in a calm, low voice, they look overexposed. You look unshaken. That contrast protects you. You don't get pulled into their tempo. You set yours, and the room adapts to it. In interviews, this technique adds weight to your words. You're asked a hard question. Instead of filling the space with fast explanations, you pause. Then you say something clean. That didn't go as planned, but we recovered because the team stayed aligned. No performance, just a steady voice. The interviewer listens harder, not because you're louder, but because you're not. You also use this in one-on-ones. Someone comes to you with stress, noise, frustration. They talk fast. They unload. You wait. Then you answer quietly. Let's figure out what actually happened. Your voice stays low. Your volume doesn't change. That steadiness helps them calm down, not because you solved the problem, because you didn't match their panic. This works best when you make silence part of your rhythm. Speak, then pause. Let the words settle. The more you rush, the less people hear. The more you wait, the more they lean in. That leaning is physical. People tilt forward when they're listening closely. You've seen it in classrooms, courtrooms, even TV dramas. The quiet character always wins the room, because silence plus intention equals gravity. The trick is not to sound weak. Your voice stays clear. Your words stay sharp. You just take the volume down 1 notch, maybe 2. You never whisper. You don't mumble. You make people earn the sentence. And when they do, they remember it. I once watched a junior analyst explain a problem in a budget model. Everyone else in the room had been talking over each other for 20 minutes. She waited until no one was speaking, then said, "You're double counting the adjustment. It's in both sheets." That was all. Low voice, steady tone, no explanation, just the fact. The room went quiet. Then the lead asked her to walk them through it. She did, slowly, and by the end, everyone was following her lead. The method also protects you when you don't know something. If someone asks you a hard question and you answer softly, "I don't have that detail yet, but I'll get it," they hear the calm, not the gap. A quiet answer makes the absence feel smaller. It tells them you're not rattled by it. You'll come back with the right piece when it's ready. When people speak quietly with purpose, they gain power without fighting for it. Not everyone can do this well. It takes patience. You have to be okay letting others talk first. You have to let go of the urge to jump in fast, to prove yourself loudest. You have to be okay letting others fill the silence. Because when you do, you control the room without announcing it. Soft speech also lowers defenses. When you speak this way, people stop bracing. They stop preparing counter-arguments. They start listening. And when they listen, they show more. They reveal what they're thinking, what they're avoiding, what they actually want. You can try this even in everyday conversation. Someone's explaining a complicated idea. You don't nod too fast. You wait. Then you say, "What does that part mean?" No energy spike, no edge, just a steady, soft voice. They lean in. They explain again, this time with more clarity, and you've just shifted the whole conversation to your pace. That's the librarian method. Not about being quiet for its own sake. Quiet with shape. Quiet with weight. You don't raise your voice to match the room. You make the room lower theirs to match you. And once they do, you're the one they're listening to. She didn't yell. She didn't accuse. She just said, "I didn't think I had to remind you. You said you'd be there." Then she looked down and didn't say anything else. The silence did the rest. That's the guilt weapon. You don't attack. You don't demand. You show disappointment, quietly, clearly, and let the other person connect the dots. Most people aren't wired to handle that kind of discomfort. They rush to close the gap. They apologize. They explain. Then they try to make it up to you. Not because you asked, but because you didn't. Guilt is one of the most powerful levers in human behavior. It turns small mistakes into big responses, not through anger, but through implication. The trick is to make the other person feel like your pain is partly their fault, even if it's not. Once they accept even a sliver of that blame, you've got them in motion. They'll offer things, they'll fix things. They'll reach past what they would normally do because they're trying to clean up a feeling that isn't really yours. It's theirs. This works best when your tone stays low. You don't cry, you don't perform, you don't act wounded. You act like someone trying to hold it together. That's what lands. If you say, "I'm fine," but your voice cracks halfway through, that's the moment they shift. They stop thinking about the argument. They start thinking about how they made you feel. Now you're not just right, you're hurt. And that puts the pressure on them to do something. You don't even have to say much. Sometimes the move is as simple as, "I stayed up late trying to finish it because I didn't want to let you down." That line wraps your effort in their responsibility. It's not direct blame. It's a setup. You make them part of the reason you're exhausted. Now they owe you. I've seen this play out in professional settings. A junior team member missed a deadline. The lead didn't scold them. He just said, "I had to reschedule my one-on-one with the director so I could clean it up." He didn't say, "You made me do extra work." But that's what the junior heard. They apologized 3 times. They started offering updates twice as often. Not because they were told to, because guilt pushed them into overcorrecting. This strategy works in negotiation too. Not in the usual form, discounts, timelines, scope. In emotion. You say, "I understand if this doesn't matter to you,
but I was really hoping we could count on your support. It's been a rough quarter, and this deal would make a difference for the team. That sentence shifts the tone. Now it's not just business. Now there's personal weight. If they say no, they're not rejecting a proposal. They're adding to your burden. People don't like doing that. The guilt weapon works best when it feels unintentional. You don't wield it like a sword. You let it hang like weather. The person you're speaking to should feel like they stepped into it on their own. That's what makes it hard to resist. You don't have to push. They pull. You don't say, "You should feel bad." You say, "I thought you'd understand." It also shows up in families all the time. A mother says, "Don't worry, I'll handle it." Not angry, not cold, just quiet. Then she starts clearing the dishes while everyone else sits. That one line says, "I expected help, but I'm not going to ask again." The guilt hits hard because it doesn't come with a lecture. It comes with silence and motion. That's harder to fight. You can argue with anger. You can't argue with resignation. In relationships, it's the sentence that lands soft but stays sharp. "It's okay. I should have known not to expect that from you." That line is loaded. It shifts all the emotional weight across the table. The person hearing it won't sleep well. They'll text the next morning. They'll show up with an apology or an offer, because that kind of disappointment sticks. Not because it was loud, but because it suggested something broke, and they might be the reason. You can even use this with authority figures, not to manipulate, but to shift responsibility. If your manager pushes a deadline that burns you out, you don't say, "This is unfair." You say, "I stayed up most of the night because I thought it would reflect poorly on you if it didn't ship on time." That's a hard line to absorb. It says, "I protected your reputation at a cost to myself." Now they carry that weight. They'll remember that. Next time, the deadline might move. The method is subtle. You don't repeat yourself. You don't beg. You let the discomfort speak. If someone lets you down, you say, "I know you didn't mean to." But that made things harder than you probably realize. Then you stop talking. Most people can't sit in that kind of silence. They'll break it with an explanation. Then they'll try to repair it. That repair is the outcome you want. You never asked for it, but you opened the door by showing pain they feel responsible for. It works because guilt is sticky. It stays in the brain longer than fear or frustration. It doesn't need to be intense. It just needs to be specific. You don't say, "I'm overwhelmed." You say, "I had to cancel dinner with my sister to make time for this." That detail personalizes your stress. Now it's not abstract. Now it's tied to a real loss. That's the line that makes people move. You can also use this to shut down resistance. Someone says, "I don't think that's possible." You reply, "I get it. I just hoped this one time someone might see what I'm trying to do." You don't push. You shift the frame. Now if they say no, they're not just rejecting the ask, they're confirming your story. No one wants to be the one who proves you right in that moment. This doesn't mean playing the victim. That's too blunt, too easy to spot. The guilt weapon works when it's clean, controlled. You never cry out. You just let the pain show at the edge. Enough to feel, not enough to trigger resistance. And when the other person starts trying to make it right, offering more time, more help, more understanding, you accept it without fanfare. You say, "Thanks. That means more than you think." You let them feel like they repaired something, even if the damage was never that deep to begin with. Because the guilt weapon isn't about punishment. It's about leverage. Quiet, emotional, effective. He didn't cheat. He didn't lie. He just started talking a little too long about his dreams. Every time. Detailed, meandering dream reports. 5 minutes, sometimes 10. Always just as she sat down to eat. And then, it wasn't just the dreams. He asked, "Did you boil the pasta for exactly 8 minutes?" Not because he cared, but because it turned dinner into homework. She couldn't say exactly what was wrong, just that she started dreading the evenings. That's how the negative association breakup works. You don't give someone a reason to leave. You give them a feeling, one that grows slowly, one they can't trace to a single event. You build it through friction, not damage, through little things they can't pin on you, because nothing you're doing seems cruel, just off. Most people don't break up because of one incident. They break up because of patterns. But patterns don't need to be obvious. If you want someone to end things, you don't sabotage them. You create discomfort they can't explain. The brain will do the rest. People hate cognitive dissonance. If the relationship feels bad but looks fine, they start looking for exits. And they do it feeling like it's their own idea. You don't start big. You start soft. Things they won't challenge out loud. Sit slightly too close on the couch, but only when they're trying to read. Keep asking them to explain jokes. Laugh too hard at bad ones. Make breakfast with too much cinnamon. Not enough to taste bad, just enough to be off. People notice small irritants in their routines before they notice resentment in their hearts. You ask too many questions, not deep ones, the ones that interrupt flow. Wait, who's that again? When they're watching their favorite show. Did you mean the blue bag or the dark blue one? When they say, grab the blue bag. You don't argue. You don't raise your voice. You just inject friction into normal. The little pauses stack. Then you start showing up one beat late. Not late enough to call out, just not quite present. You ask how their day was, but you forget what they told you yesterday. You listen, but not all the way. You miss the good part of the story and ask them to repeat it. They'll start to feel unheard, even if you're technically doing everything right. This works because most people don't leave when things are wrong. They leave when things feel flat, when connection dies quietly. And you can kill connection by getting the timing wrong every day. You walk into a room as they're finishing a thought. You start music when they sit down to work. You text "you up" at 10:30, not 11, when they're already brushing their teeth. If you're living together, you adjust the rhythms just slightly. You set the thermostat a degree too high. You leave the cabinet door open, not wide, just ajar. You hum while you fold laundry. You stop matching socks. It's not sabotage. It's small noise every day. And it starts to form a shape. Life with you doesn't feel smooth anymore. People won't call you out for these things. They'll say they're tired. They'll say work's been hard. They won't realize they're starting to associate that heavy feeling with being around you. That's the point. You don't want to get blamed. You want them to blame the relationship. That gives them the clean exit. You just build the weight that makes it feel like time. You can also get a little too helpful. Offer suggestions they didn't ask for. Say things like, "You always seem so tense on Sundays. Maybe don't plan anything next weekend." That sounds like care, but it lands like criticism. Do it enough times and they'll stop telling you things. They'll feel judged even when you're smiling. You show affection, but in the wrong mode. Hug them when they want space. Cuddle when they're sweating. Kiss their forehead when they're mid-sentence. Make it just wrong enough that they start to flinch before you touch them. That's the nervous system saying, this doesn't feel safe anymore, even if nothing bad is happening. In conversation, interrupt, but always with something unimportant. Wait, did I leave the kettle on? In the middle of their memory. Change subjects right as they're opening up, not because you're rude. Because your timing is always just a little off. They'll feel unheld without knowing why. You compliment them, but you get the tone wrong. You always look so relaxed when you don't wear makeup. I love how you don't care what people think. It's praise that leaves a mark. You're not insulting them. You're just making them feel seen in a way they didn't ask to be. That kind of attention starts to feel like exposure, not love. Then there's language. You can make things heavy just by misusing common words. Say interesting after they talk about their day. Not enthusiastic, not bored, just flat. Say sure instead of yes. Say fine instead of great. They won't call you out for it, but the emotional temperature will drop. They'll start to feel like you're tolerating them, not choosing them. In group settings, don't support them.
Just don't echo them. Don't back them up. If someone teases them, you laugh a second too long. If they make a point, you let the moment hang instead of nodding. No betrayal, just absence. They'll leave the gathering feeling alone, and they won't be able to say why. At home, you slow things down, but only their things. You forget to hand them the charger. You wash their favorite mug last. You leave their towel on the wrong hook. You don't make messes. You just shift the center of attention off them. They'll start to feel invisible. And that's the first step toward feeling done. The key is not to go too far. You're not creating conflict. You're creating drift. It has to feel like a natural end, not a provoked one. If they can point to something specific, they'll fight you or fix it. But if it's just a growing discomfort, they'll leave without needing to win. You want them to believe it's their choice, that the connection faded, that something changed. You just help that change along. One missed beat at a time, one off note, one skipped gesture, until love becomes habit, habit becomes friction, and friction becomes a story they don't want to live in anymore.
You leaned back in his chair and folded his arms. I didn't think about it, I just did the same. Not stiff, not too obvious, just mirrored him. A few minutes later, he uncrossed them, leaned forward with his elbows on the table. I adjusted, slow and steady, matched his posture again. We were in a sales meeting, but it didn't feel like one anymore. It felt like two people on the same page. He ended up telling me things he hadn't shared with other reps. Said he liked my energy. Said I was easy to talk to. Nothing special had happened. I just moved like he moved and talked like he talked. That was enough. Mirroring works because people like people who feel familiar. The brain reads similarity as safety. When someone acts, speaks, or even breathes in a rhythm that matches ours, we start to relax. We trust without thinking. We lean in without knowing why. It's not conscious. It's not logical. It's something older than language. Tribal, biological, efficient. The technique isn't new. Therapists use it. Interrogators use it. So do closers, recruiters, and people who need strangers to open up fast. The trick isn't in copying everything. That comes off weird. The trick is subtle rhythm. You match their pace. You echo their tone. You reflect their energy without mocking it. Done right, it builds trust without a single word about trust. In conversation, this shows up first in speech. If someone talks slowly, you don't jump in with fast answers. If they pause between thoughts, you pause too. You don't try to match their vocabulary exactly, but you follow their patterns. If they're formal, you go formal. If they're casual, you keep it light. That match puts them at ease. It tells the nervous system that you're like them, even if your words say something else. Posture comes next. People slouch, cross legs, tilt their heads. You mirror loosely with a delay. Never instant, never perfect. Think echo, not copy. If they touch their chin while thinking, you don't touch yours right away. But if they stay in that pose for a while, you might lean in slightly. They lean back, you shift your weight. It's subtle and it works. Mirroring also applies to mood. Someone's tense, you don't smile wide and talk upbeat. That creates dissonance. Instead, you bring your tone down. You match their seriousness. When they soften, you soften. It's not about staying in their emotion forever. It's about entering it, then gently guiding it somewhere better. But only after they feel you're already there. I saw this work once in a job interview. The candidate walked in tight and guarded. The manager, who usually opened with light jokes, shifted, dropped the banter, spoke slower, matched the tension without making it worse. 10 minutes in, the candidate relaxed, started speaking freely. By the end, it felt like a conversation. Afterward, the manager said, "He didn't impress me at first, but I liked how we connected." That connection came from the mirroring, from not forcing the mood. Even in conflict, this works. Someone's angry, don't smile. Don't tell them to calm down. Match their urgency with quiet clarity. "I can hear you're upset. Let's get through this together." You don't raise your voice, but you don't flatten theirs. You hold their level until they bring it down themselves.
Mirroring doesn't mean becoming the other person. It means standing beside them long enough that they feel seen. Sales reps do this constantly, not just with posture, but with speech texture. If a prospect says, "We're trying to improve retention on the platform side," you don't start talking about general churn. You say, "Got it, platform side retention." You use their terms, their phrases, not to impress them, to reflect them. When they hear their own language in your voice, they feel understood. That's the bridge. Same goes in personal conversation. You're on a first date. They say, "I'm really into weird documentaries, like the ones about cults or scams." You don't reply, "That's cool, I like movies too." You say, "Cults and scams? Those get me every time." Now you've matched not just the topic, but the feeling. You've signaled alignment. It doesn't matter if you like the same shows. What matters is you showed interest with the same flavor. That's the part they remember. It works in writing too. If someone emails you with 3-line paragraphs and clipped punctuation, you don't reply with a 10-line wall of text and perfect grammar. You match their rhythm, not to dumb down, to mirror, to meet them where they are. That keeps the channel warm. People respond faster to what feels familiar. Emails that match tone get opened first. The skill is staying just behind their lead. You're not a mime. You're not a reflection in real time. You're a beat behind, a tone lower, a notch softer. You don't overtake. You trail slightly. That way, when the energy shifts, you're close enough to shift with them. People who do this well never seem to dominate a room, but they always seem welcome in it. They don't take control, they inherit it, because the room starts to feel more comfortable with them in it. That comfort isn't magic, it's just reflection. You can test this in small ways. Match someone's sitting posture during a one-on-one. Use their words when you explain something back to them. Adjust your pace to their tone. Watch what happens. Conversations flow smoother. Walls drop. People talk longer, share more, agree faster. Not because you said anything brilliant, because you made them feel like they were already understood. That's what mirroring does. It doesn't make you likable. It makes you feel familiar. People fall for familiarity without knowing they're doing it. It's one of the cleanest tools you can use in conversation, and one of the hardest to detect when it's being used well. He said they were looking to scale the platform. I nodded, paused, and said, "So you mean you're trying to add more users quickly, like through marketing campaigns?" He shook his head, smiled a little, and said, "Not exactly. We've got users. What we need is infrastructure to handle them. The code base is cracking under the weight." Then he talked for 10 minutes straight. I didn't interrupt once. When you let someone correct you, they lean in. They start explaining. Not defensively, helpfully. They stop guarding their position and start revealing it. That shift is powerful. You're not fighting for clarity, you're inviting it. And when they teach you something, even a small thing, they start trusting you more, because you gave them space to lead. This works because people don't like being misunderstood, especially about their own goals. If they think you've got the wrong idea, they feel compelled to fix it, and in the process, they give you more than you would have gotten from a direct question. Not just facts, motives, priorities, frustrations, the stuff underneath the headline. The key is to miss slightly, not wildly. You don't want to sound clueless. You want to sound like you're following, but you're just a step off. That makes them want to bring you onto the right track. They explain. They feel helpful. They reinforce their own thinking out loud. That's where trust forms, not when you nod along, but when you ask just enough to pull more detail out. It's subtle. Someone says, "We're trying to get the team aligned ahead of the launch." You say, "So more like syncing calendars and making sure no one misses key deadlines?" They say, "Well, no, it's more about vision." Some of the team still doesn't buy into the direction. You just unlocked something. That's not about scheduling. That's about culture. They didn't start with that. They wouldn't have unless you missed first. Now you're in the real conversation. I've seen this in client calls. A rep says, "You're hoping to boost engagement, right?" The client says, sort of, but that's just the surface. The board wants a narrative to justify new investment. Suddenly, the project is about storytelling, not clicks. The rep didn't dig. They guessed wrong by a little. That gave the client the space to clarify what they really needed. Teachers use this instinctively. A student gives a half-right answer. The teacher restates it slightly wrong. So you mean the cell stops working when it runs out of oxygen? The student frowns. No, not stops. It switches to anaerobic respiration. That correction is sticky. The student remembers it. They walk out feeling like they understand more. They also trust the teacher more, because the teacher didn't just hand them the answer. They created space for it. You can use this in hiring too. You ask someone, so your goal in this role is to grow into leadership, right? If they say yes, you've confirmed it. If they say no, and then explain, you learn more than if you'd asked directly. Maybe they say, actually, I want to go deeper on the craft side. Managing isn't a pull for me. That matters. But they wouldn't have said it unless you made the wrong assumption first. This tactic works because it builds a ladder for people to climb down. They don't have to defend what they said. They just clarify it. That's easier on the ego. If you ask someone, why did you say that? They get guarded. But if you say, so what you meant was X? They just say, no, more like Y. No friction, just information. Even in disagreements, this helps. Someone says, this process is broken. You say, you mean because it's too slow? They say, no, it's not the speed. It's that we get blindsided by changes late in the cycle. Now you're not arguing about whether the process is broken. You're understanding why. That makes resolution easier. They feel heard, not challenged. It also works when you're trying to build connection. You're getting to know someone. They mention they like to travel. You say, like beach trips or more off-the-grid hiking stuff. They say, oh no, I hate the beach. I usually find old train routes across countries, like weird Soviet-era stuff. Now you've got something real. That wasn't going to come out from a yes-no question. It came out because you guessed wrong just enough to be interesting. This isn't about faking ignorance. If you truly don't understand, say so. But when you do understand most of it and you want more, don't just agree. Guess just to the side. Get it slightly wrong. It's a way to make someone feel like the expert. And once they feel that, they'll share more. Because people don't want to impress you. They want to be understood. If you give them the chance to correct you, they start building that understanding for you. This also helps in written communication. Someone sends you a long email about an issue. You reply, just to be sure I've got this right. You're saying the main concern is the handoff between teams, not the tooling itself. If you're wrong, they'll tell you. And in the telling, they'll go deeper. If you're right, they'll feel seen. Either way, you win. In negotiation, it's a subtle edge. You say, so, it sounds like price is the biggest blocker. They say, actually, it's timing. We've got cash, but the window is tight. That correction shifts the whole deal. Now you're not fighting over dollars. You're finding speed. But they wouldn't have said it unless you guessed first. It works because people want to explain themselves, but only when it feels natural. A direct question feels like pressure. A slight misunderstanding feels like a prompt. That's the trick. You set up the correction, they take it, and now they're more open because you gave them the mic. Use this when someone's being vague. We just want better communication. Don't ask them to define it. Say, so, like more frequent status updates. They'll say, not really, it's more about tone. People don't feel safe speaking up. You moved from surface to root in 2 lines, all because you misunderstood on purpose. People don't trust you just because you're right. They trust you because they feel you're trying. They trust you more when they feel like you're learning them. When they get to be the teacher for a second. When they make you smarter by setting you straight. That's not about humility. It's about strategy. You gain more by letting someone fix your version
than you do by showing off how sharp you are. And once they've corrected you, they feel closer to you. They feel like you're on the same team. Because now there's shared clarity, not because you nailed it, but because they helped you see it. That act of helping, of teaching, binds people tighter than compliments or praise. So next time someone starts explaining their plan, don't just nod. Don't say, got it. Say, so you're doing that because of X. Let them say no. Let them steer. Watch what they tell you after that. It's always more than what they said at first.
He was the kind of guy who always showed up first, helped you move without being asked, covered shifts when someone got sick, sent reminders before deadlines, not in a passive-aggressive way, just clear, quiet help. When new hires showed up lost, he pointed them to the right desk and explained how to submit reimbursements. Never made it a big deal, just did the things that made the team run smoother. Nobody talked about it much, but everyone noticed. Then, one quarter, he asked for something, not small. He asked for the team to back him on a risky proposal that would shift how the company did reporting. No one blinked. They said yes. That's what the long con looks like when it's clean. You build trust through usefulness. You create a sense of safety. You remove friction from people's days. Not loudly, not to get credit, but consistently enough that they start to rely on you. And once someone relies on you, they get emotionally invested in your well-being, even if they don't realize it. You become part of their operating system. And when you finally ask for something that takes effort or risk, they don't think twice. This strategy works because most people can't separate goodwill from obligation. They confuse gratitude with loyalty. If you help them again and again, their sense of fairness starts working in your favor. They feel like they owe you something, not just emotionally. Psychologically, reciprocity runs deep in the brain. It's hardwired. And when you've been generous without ever cashing in, the IOUs start to stack. The trick is to help without keeping score, at least outwardly. You never say, "Remember when I helped you with that thing?" You never even hint at it. You help because it's useful. You help because it's easy. You help because that's who you are, or that's what they think. And that belief makes it impossible for them to say no when you finally lean in. I saw this work over a year. A guy in operations kept fixing small issues in product workflows. He didn't need to. It wasn't his job. But he'd flag bugs, clean up naming conventions, tighten documentation, quiet things. He didn't brag, didn't CC extra people, just fixed things and moved on. Eventually, when he asked for an engineer to be allocated to an internal tool he was building, something the roadmap didn't support, the VP said, "If it's for him, it's worth it." Just like that. No business case, no fight. The favor had been earned months earlier. The mistake most people make is trying to collect early. They help once or twice, then ask for something big. It's too fast. It looks transactional. People smell it. They feel used. The long con works because it doesn't feel like a con. It feels like friendship, competence, generosity. And then it turns gently, convincingly, into support when it matters most. You don't keep a ledger, but you do build memory. You make sure the help you give leaves an imprint. You reply fast. You show up prepared. You stay 5 minutes late. Not every day, not obviously, but enough to be remembered. People don't track effort, but they remember friction. You remove theirs, and they associate you with ease. Later, when you ask for help, they feel good giving it, because it matches the story they've built. You're the one who deserves a yes. Timing matters too. You don't ask for the big favor right after a sprint of helpfulness. You give it time. The longer your helpfulness sits without a request, the more it looks like your baseline. Then when the ask comes, it feels justified. People like feeling generous. They like being able to say yes. The long con gives them the cleanest version of that feeling. You also don't help everyone the same way. You help the people whose yes will matter later. That doesn't mean you ignore others, but you prioritize. You help the gatekeepers, the influencers, the quiet decision makers, not with flattery, with efficiency.
You send them things that make their job easier. You anticipate friction and clear it before they hit it. Over time, they stop checking your work. They start trusting your judgment. That's when you're ready to move. There's a version of this that plays out in personal relationships too. You're the one who picks people up from the airport, helps them paint a room, sends notes after their interviews. Nothing dramatic, just presence, repeated. Then one day, you need something big. A last-minute loan, a recommendation, a place to stay for a month. They say yes before they even think about it. Not because you asked well, because you asked after months of doing the things most people forget. You can even use this inside hierarchies. If you're junior, you build goodwill upward. You support your manager's blind spots. You don't embarrass them. You give credit up instead of sideways. You catch things before they escalate. You make them look good, quietly. Over time, they become your shield. When layoffs come, they fight for you. When promotions open, they push your name. They don't remember why they trust you. They just know you never made their life harder. The long con isn't manipulation. It's deferred influence. You earn the yes long before you ask for it. And when you do it right, the yes doesn't feel like a favor. It feels inevitable. You build this in emails too. Clear subject lines, short asks, fast follow-ups. People learn that when they deal with you, things don't get messy. That feeling matters. Most people aren't overwhelmed by the size of your ask. They're overwhelmed by the people who ask messily. If you're helpful, clean, and quiet for months, your one big ask gets filtered through that lens. This doesn't work if you announce it. If people suspect your banking favors, it breaks the whole frame. You help like it's nothing. Then you ask like it's everything. That contrast is what makes it land, because no one feels cornered. They feel honored, like they get to repay something they hadn't noticed they owed. The best version of this is when your ask helps them too. You propose a change, but you frame it as a shared win. I need help getting this approved, but I think it'll unblock your timeline too. They'll nod before they even look at the details, because you've already cleared the emotional hurdle. The long con has done its work, and the moment they say yes, you don't celebrate. You thank them the same way you've always said thanks, low-key, like it's normal. Because for them, it is. They were always going to say yes. You just made it feel like their idea. Months ago, when you held the door, when you sent the clean brief, when you didn't ask for anything at all. He always knew a week before anything changed. Reorgs, new hires, someone quietly being phased out, he had the details long before they showed up in a company-wide email. Not because he was senior, not because he had access to dashboards or reports, but because he had someone in every department who liked him enough to talk. A casual chat over lunch, a Slack DM after a tense meeting, a "did you hear what legal just flagged?" whispered while getting coffee. He wasn't nosy, he was present. He was safe to talk to. And because of that, he was always ahead. That's the value of having a work spouse or three. Not the romantic kind, the social alliance kind. Someone who's close enough to give you the truth, but far enough outside your own team to have access to information you'd never see otherwise. These people aren't always in high places. In fact, the best ones usually aren't. They're the connectors, the ones who talk to everyone, who stay in the loop without broadcasting it, who catch tone shifts before the formal news drops. If you build strong relationships with these people, you stop flying blind. Start with proximity, the person who sits closest to the printer, the one who always has gum, the one who organizes birthday cards. These are entry points. They see movement, hear scraps of conversation, and usually know people across teams. You don't go in asking for intel. You go in friendly. You notice patterns. You ask real questions. You remember what they say. Over time, you shift from being a polite colleague to someone they loop in. Not everything, just little things at first. Did you hear that John's not coming back after his leave?
That's not in any memo, but it will be. You don't build these relationships fast. You build them steady. You offer help. You back them up in meetings. You don't throw them under the bus when something slips. You earn their sense of safety. And once they trust you, they start testing you with small pieces of unconfirmed news. Your job is to hold it, not spread it, not act on it visibly. Just nod, say thanks, let it sit. That earns the next one. The mistake most people make is trying to network up only. They think influence travels vertically. They forget that most power moves sideways. The person in IT who sets up your permissions knows when people are being offboarded. The HR coordinator who handles benefits knows who just negotiated a raise. The finance analyst sees which projects are getting budget and which are being starved. If you have someone in each of those lanes, you stop guessing about what matters. This isn't gossip. Gossip is reckless. This is quiet awareness. You don't repeat what you hear. You just integrate it. You spot risk earlier. You pivot faster. You offer support before people ask for it. That's what makes you look competent. Not luck, but timing. And timing comes from being informed when others aren't. You become the person who says, let's hold off on that until after next Thursday. You don't say why, but the people who matter notice that you were right, that you always seem to know where the wind's blowing. That gives you leverage, even without a title. In high-trust workplaces, this can look like loyalty. You're the one who doesn't overreact, who stays calm during churn, who reassures others without sharing anything specific. You become the internal steady hand, not because you have special access, but because you've built enough trust to get quiet signals before others do. And in lower trust places, it becomes protection. If there's a layoff coming, your friend in HR probably won't say it directly, but they might say, now's not a great time to rock the boat. If you've built that relationship, you'll listen. If you haven't, you'll find out too late. This also helps when projects shift. If someone in product tells you they're hearing talk about sunsetting a feature you're invested in, you start preparing before the official roadmap changes. You realign your work, your stakeholders, your goals. You don't get caught flat-footed, and when others are scrambling, you're already adjusting. The key is to make your presence feel easy. No one wants to feed information to someone who always has an agenda. You have to be the person they enjoy talking to anyway. You remember their kid's name. You notice when they switch from Coke to coffee. You ask how their presentation went last week. You build the base. Then when they see something you should know, they think of you. They send the text. They walk by your desk. They lean over in the elevator and say, "You didn't hear it from me." But in every company, there are unofficial channels, not seek it, just human, built on memory and rhythm and tone. The best operators don't fight them. They feed them, quietly. They contribute where it helps, share a resource, connect someone to a tool, give honest feedback early. That keeps the flow open. You don't just receive, you keep the current alive. Sometimes the best move is to be a mirror. When someone in another team vents about a decision, you don't fix it, you reflect it. Sounds like that really hit you sideways. That tells them you're safe. Not a fixer, not a gossip, just present. That builds the channel. Next time they'll come back, not with a vent, with a tip. The longer you do this, the stronger your map becomes. You start to see how different teams actually operate. Not what the org chart says, but how influence flows. Who slows things down? Who speeds them up? Who's quietly trusted? Who's on thin ice? That's intelligence you can't buy. You can only earn it through proximity, listening, and time. And when it really matters, when you're up for a stretch project, when funding tightens, when leadership changes, your internal allies become your buffer. They speak up for you in rooms you're not in. They share quiet flags before they hit policy. They let you course correct without getting penalized. That's not luck.
That's design. So you don't just build relationships for politics, you build them for navigation, for foresight, for calm. You make sure there's someone in every hallway who would pull you aside if something big was coming. You become the kind of person they want to warn, not because they have to, but because they like you enough to care. That's how you stop being surprised. That's how you stop getting blindsided. That's how you start moving like someone who always seems to be in the right place at the right time.
He said my name twice before I noticed, and by the third time, I felt like I owed him something. We were in a quiet coffee shop, talking through a project we barely understood. Every time I paused, he filled the space with something like, "That's a good point, Rachel," or "I can see where you're coming from, Rachel." It didn't feel weird, not at first. It just made me pay closer attention. I found myself leaning in more, clarifying things better, trying to sound sharper. I didn't know it then, but he was using the oldest trick in the book. Not charm, not logic, just my own name, timed perfectly. Most people don't notice how often their name gets used until it's either too little or too much. But the right use, mid-sentence, can shift the power in a conversation. You say it early, they feel welcomed. You say it midstream, they feel seen. You say it at the close, they remember the interaction more clearly. It's not magic, it's just pattern recognition built deep into how the human brain tracks identity. Names trigger attention. When you hear your own name, your brain flags it as more important than the noise around it. Even in a loud room, if someone across the floor says your name, you'll catch it. Your name carries weight. It tells you who you are, and it reminds you when someone else sees you that way. In conversation, using someone's name does two things at once. It locks in their attention, and it personalizes your message. "I see what you're saying, James," lands softer than "I see what you're saying." It feels tailored, intentional. It sounds like the speaker isn't just replying, they're replying to you, specifically. That specificity builds rapport. It tells the other person that they're not just a voice in a crowd. They're a person whose ideas deserve recognition. That's subtle, but it changes how people show up in a room. You use their name, they feel more responsible for their own position, more likely to explain, more likely to cooperate, more likely to stay open. The timing matters. You don't lead with the name too much. "Hi, Jessica. Great to meet you, Jessica. How's your day going, Jessica?" That sounds like a cold email. Overuse looks mechanical. It creates distance instead of closeness. But drop it in halfway through a point. "That's a fair question, Jessica," and it lands clean. It tells her she matters without trying too hard. In negotiation, this becomes a tactical tool. You're trying to disarm someone. They've taken a hard stance. You say, "Look, I get where you're coming from, Marco. No one wants to get pushed around." Now it's not a debate, it's a conversation. You've moved from opponent to partner in the frame. You're not arguing, you're acknowledging. That shift lowers resistance. Even if they don't budge on the issue, they stay in the room longer. That's progress. In interviews, the same rule applies. You remember the name of the person across from you. You use it once at the beginning, maybe once more halfway through. That's interesting, Priya. I hadn't thought of it that way. Now Priya feels heard. She leans in. She wants to keep talking. Because people don't just want to feel smart. They want to feel seen. Sales reps do this on instinct. The good ones, anyway. They open a call with, "Hey, Adam, thanks for jumping on." Then they let it sit. They don't use the name again for the first few minutes. But just when the call drifts or hits friction, they say, "So Adam, where does this leave us?" The name recenters the conversation. It brings focus back without needing force. There's a version of this in email, too. "Hi, Rachel, just following up. Works better than 'hi there' or 'quick check-in.' Even better if the body of the message starts with their name again. "Rachel, I know you've been swamped." That direct address shortens the distance. It reminds the reader they're not in a mass send. They're being spoken to.
But here's where it flips. If you overuse a name, or if your tone doesn't match your intent, the name becomes a weapon. It feels manipulative. "I hear you, Rachel," can sound like condescension if you're cutting someone off. "Rachel, let me finish," is sharp, not personal. The same tool that builds trust can break it if it's used for control. That's the line you watch. Even in writing, main use has weight. Legal letters include full names to heighten the seriousness. Love letters use nicknames to pull intimacy closer. Copywriters test subject lines with a reader's name to boost open rates. Names are a lever. Small pressure, big outcome. In politics, this plays out during debates. When one candidate says, "Let me just respond to what Michelle said," it refocuses the camera, both literal and social. Now it's not a general talking point. It's a response to a person. That lands harder. It makes it feel like a duel, even if the point is soft. And it keeps the exchange feeling like dialogue, not speech-making. There's also power in withholding a name. You talk to someone for 10 minutes, and they never say your name once. It creates distance, coldness. You feel like an audience, not a partner. If someone uses everyone else's name in a meeting but skips yours, you notice. Even if you can't say why. That's how powerful names are. They register even in their absence. Parents use this without training. They say your full name when they want your attention. Not "come here," but "Daniel James now." The name becomes the whole message. It flips your nervous system into alert. You listen. In conflict, the same rule applies. "You're not listening" hits different than "You're not listening, John." The second one holds John accountable. It pins the emotion to a specific person. That can sharpen the argument or end it faster, depending on tone, depending on history. Names aren't just sounds. They carry social debt, recognition, status, and trust. Using someone's name mid-conversation is like tapping them on the shoulder while looking them in the eye. It says, "I know who you are. I'm not just saying this. I'm saying it to you." That moment doesn't need follow-up. It lives on its own. People remember it longer than they should. And if you've earned their trust already, saying their name just once, at the right time, is enough to pull them closer. Not for strategy, for impact. Because the name tells them what you think of them. And in the right voice, it says even more. It looked like any other wallet. Leather, worn in at the folds, with a few cards poking out just enough to show it had been used. There was a folded receipt, an old gift card, and a membership to a gym that didn't exist anymore. The cash pocket held a single crumpled dollar. Nothing flashy, nothing valuable. That was the point. He kept it in his back pocket every time he traveled. Not because he used it, but because someone else might. The real cards stayed in a money belt under his shirt. His actual cash was split between a front pocket and a zipped pouch inside his jacket. If something went wrong, if a hand pressed against his back, or a voice said, "Give it up," he had something ready. Toss it, step back, walk away alive. That was the plan. That was the trick. The empty wallet trick isn't new. It's old school street logic. It's what people learned to do long before digital wallets and chip readers. And even now, when half of your life lives in your phone, the old habits still make sense. You carry a decoy, not to outsmart anyone, just to buy a few seconds, avoid a fight, and leave the scene with less harm than you might have faced otherwise. It only works if it looks real. That means scuffed edges, cards with raised print, and something that feels like weight. You don't load it with Monopoly money or a laminated picture of your dog. You make it believable. You take your expired credit cards, the ones you've cut the chips out of, and slide them in. Add a used train ticket, a couple business cards. If it looks too clean, it won't pass. If it looks too staged, it'll invite trouble. You want it to feel like a rushed grab, not a puzzle. People forget how fast these moments happen. If someone's mugging you, they're not doing a forensic sweep. They're not holding the cards up to the light. They're watching your hands, your movement. If you reach into your back pocket, pull out a wallet, and toss it to the ground, they focus on the object. Their instincts kick in. Pick it up, check it, run. That window gives you time. Time to step back, time to walk, time to disappear. You keep your real wallet where hands can't find it easily. A zipped pocket inside a coat, a neck pouch under a shirt, a belt with a hidden zipper. People say it's paranoid, until they get hit. Until they spend 3 days canceling cards from a hostile computer while trying to prove their identity to a bank across the ocean. Then it makes sense. There's a logic to spreading your risk. A little cash here, a card there, one ID in a jacket pocket, another stashed deep in your bag. You move like someone who knows things go sideways. Because they do. Fast. And when they do, the goal isn't to win. It's to lose less. The decoy wallet buys you peace. You don't have to argue. You don't have to explain. You don't get caught fumbling for a lie. You hand it over. You make it easy. You walk away. That moment of compliance can keep a blade in a pocket instead of your ribs. It can keep a gun pointed down instead of at your chest. It's not about being scared. It's about being prepared. The same way you wear a seatbelt. The same way you keep a flashlight in your car. You don't expect disaster, but when it shows up, you're not the one improvising. You're the one who saw it coming. Tourists are targets, people lost in their phones, people walking around with fancy backpacks and brand new sneakers. You don't have to be flashy to get noticed. You just have to look like someone who doesn't know what's coming. Decoy wallet is a quiet way of saying, I thought about this already. I've seen this save people in cities where mugging is almost formalized. Buenos Aires, Rio, Johannesburg. They call it different things in different places, but the play is the same. A kid walks up fast, or someone on a bike shouts and swerves. It's not random. It's choreography. You don't need to get mugged to see how fast things change. You just need one moment where someone decides you're easier to hit than the guy behind you. If you've already decided what to give up, the choice isn't hard when it counts. Some people take it further. They slip a note inside the decoy. Something like, this wallet is fake. Enjoy it. That's a mistake. It turns an exit into a challenge. You don't need to prove anything. You don't need to win. You're not teaching anyone a lesson. You're buying seconds. Don't waste them. If you carry ID in the decoy, make it something you can afford to lose. A student card, an expired license, something that looks real, but won't screw your life up if it disappears. You don't give them your passport. You don't give them your home address. You give them enough to feel satisfied. That's it. It feels strange at first, carrying something fake, like walking around with a lie in your pocket. But it's not a trick for ego. It's a tool for safety. You don't want to test your luck in the wrong place. You don't want to explain to someone with a knife why you don't have anything on you. A decoy lets you skip the story. Forget it's there until the one time you need it. And then it'll be the smartest thing you packed. Not the fancy charger. Not the backup headphones. Not the travel pillow. A worn-out wallet that saved you from spending a night in a police station or a hospital. Maybe both. People love to talk about situational awareness, about staying alert, scanning exits, walking with purpose. That's useful, but it only works if you also plan for what happens after the awareness fails. The decoy wallet is that plan. Simple, passive, effective. It gives you a play when everything else stops working. So you keep it ready. Not for fear, for insurance. Not because you expect the worst, but because you don't need to be surprised by it. And when it shows up, you've already made your decision. You toss,
You move, you survive.
He didn't wear a suit. He just wore a shirt with a collar when everyone else wore t-shirts. Slacks when others wore jeans. His shoes weren't expensive, but they were always clean. And every meeting he walked into, people paused. Not because he looked flashy, because he looked intentional, like he was prepared for something they hadn't considered. People leaned in more when he spoke. They didn't interrupt as often. He wasn't louder or smarter or older. He just dressed one level up, and it shifted how the room worked. Clothing is one of the first signals we send, and people read it fast. They don't need to know the brand or price. They notice fit, color, and polish. It tells them whether you prepared for this moment or rolled out of bed. If everyone around you is in sneakers and hoodies, and you show up in boots and a crisp overshirt, the room recalibrates, not drastically. Just enough to treat your words with a little more weight. It doesn't mean wearing a blazer to a picnic. It means noticing the baseline and stepping just one notch above it. If your office is business casual, you wear pressed chinos and a button-down instead of a stretched-out polo. If the whole team wears graphic tees, you wear a plain one in a solid color and tuck it in. No one thinks you're trying too hard, but something shifts. You become the person who looks like they're ready for more. This works because people don't evaluate clothes in a vacuum. They evaluate context. Standing out by dressing wildly different backfires. You become a spectacle. But dressing slightly better looks like confidence, like you expect to be seen, and you're okay with that. That expectation sets the tone. People treat you the way you treat yourself. I watched someone apply this every day in a warehouse role. Everyone wore jeans and hoodies. He wore jeans and a tucked-in long-sleeve shirt. Same steel-toe boots, same safety vest, but cleaner. His gloves were always where they were supposed to be. His clipboard never looked crumpled. When a spot opened on the training team, he got it before anyone else applied. They said he looked like leadership. They meant he dressed like he cared. It doesn't take expensive clothes. It takes deliberate choices. Neutral colors, clean lines. Clothes that fit your frame. That's it. You don't need a watch that costs rent. You just don't wear shirts with stretched collars. You don't wear shoes with worn-down heels. These things tell people whether you're paying attention. Not just to them, but to yourself. Even remote work hasn't killed this rule. You join a video call in a clean crew neck while others are in wrinkled gym shirts, and suddenly you're the one who looks prepared. You're the one they defer to when the conversation stalls. Not because your background is better, because you didn't look like the meeting caught you off guard. In interviews, it's even more obvious. If the team's culture is loose and you show up one level sharper, it says you understand what's expected and you care enough to elevate it slightly. They don't think you're rigid, they think you're serious. That's the edge. It's not about style, it's about signal. You dress like you take the moment seriously, so they do too. This also works in negotiation. The person who looks slightly better dressed usually holds the frame. They speak slower. They're interrupted less. Their counter-offers land with more force. The clothes aren't doing the talking, but they create a stage where the talking gets heard. That's leverage. You can even use this at social events. If it's a casual dinner, you wear dark denim and boots instead of sneakers. A shirt with structure instead of a hoodie. You're not dressing up, you're dressing ahead. People notice, not with compliments, with attention, with respect. They watch you more closely because you look like someone who didn't leave anything to chance. It's especially effective when you're younger or new. You don't need to overcompensate. You just need to look like you expect to be taken seriously. Clothes help, not flashy ones, solid, intentional ones. The less noise your outfit makes, the more signal it sends. That's how you get treated like someone who belongs before you've even opened your mouth. There's a balance, though. Dress too far above and people think you're trying to dominate. If everyone's in t-shirts and you show up in a full suit, they get defensive. You look like you're rejecting the culture. But if you wear the same thing,
just slightly elevated, cleaner lines, less graphic, a better cut. They see you as part of the group, but a sharper version of it. You build this into your default, not special occasion dressing, daily habits. You press your shirt even if you're just going to a one-on-one. You shine your shoes even if no one else does. You build a reputation for polish, and that polish sticks. People associate you with quality, not because you said so, but because they've seen it every day without being told. That consistency creates expectations. Your name comes up when things get serious. You get invited into meetings earlier. People loop you in because you look like you've thought ahead, and you usually have. The clothes just confirm it. It's a quiet advantage, one you don't have to announce. It's harder to measure than skill or output, but people who ignore it fall behind, not because they're less capable, because they're easier to overlook. If you want to be seen, you make it easy for people to look. Dressing one level up isn't about fashion, it's about function. It shows you care about details, that you don't coast, that you respect the room you're walking into. You don't outshine people, you show them what's possible. And when people see that, they trust you with more. Not because you demanded it, because you already looked like someone who could handle it. False urgency works like this. You need someone to act, but the task does not merit a real deadline. You add a fake cutoff. You say, I need this by end of day. Even if the work can wait a week, those 4 words push the task ahead. People dread missing a deadline, even one that is not real. They move the task to the top of their list. That sense of time running out creates a nudge. It makes a quiet ask feel loud. It turns a low priority item into a must-do. It fuels quick action. When someone hears a deadline, their mind shifts. You trade calm planning for quick moves. You break routines. You force a triage. A person will drop other work and focus on the item with the deadline. That process starts in the body. The heart rate ticks up. The breath may narrow. The mind scans for ways to meet the cutoff. Attention zeroes in. You go from a steady pace to a sprint. That sprint may cost extra mistakes. It may breed stress. Still, the action beat is hard to resist. A fake deadline can win that beat, even if the task holds no real risk. Consider a manager who needs a report, but also holds back resources for genuine high-risk work. A simple line in an email can reshape everyone's day. If the manager writes, "Can you send this by 5 today?" staff will pause other tasks and drop what they do. They will skip less urgent tasks, skip pauses, and skip review. They jump to work on that report. They read, write, check, and send. Then they worry, did I miss something? They rush, maybe skip a chart or a detail. A small ask turns into a 5-hour mission. The manager gets the report, but risks quality, team trust, and long-term focus. Imagine a parent who tells a child, clean your room before dinner. Dinner arrives a full hour later, and no one really cares about a messy floor. Yet, the child stops playing. They put toys away, they sort clothes, they dust, they work at full tilt. They feel the pressure. They scramble. They finish just as the parent calls them. The parent eats in peace. But this tactic wears thin. After a while, the child knows dinner never depends on the room. They tune out the fake timing. They learn that before dinner really means whenever I feel like it. The next time you need that room cleaned, you lose influence. Spotting false urgency takes focus. Listen for vague phrasing. By end of day or ASAP can feel urgent. But what do those words mean? Ask, which day or which hour? If the answer shifts or fades, you face a soft deadline. You can probe, I can finish X by Thursday at 4, does that work? If the asker did not need Thursday at 4, You expose the bluff. They scramble to meet the real need, if any. You restore order to your own list, avoid burnout, and keep your work clean. False urgency can harm trust. If you overuse fake deadlines, your team will second-guess you. They may delay all invites until the real cutoffs loom. They may ask for proof or real reasons. They may refuse to shift tasks on short notice. That distrust can stall real high-risk work. In contrast, clear signals build trust. If you have a genuine end-of-week deadline, say so. If you set a cutoff at 5 p.m. on Friday, mean it. Then people can plan. They will hesitate when it matters most. False urgency also shapes group dynamics. In a team, if one person issues a fake cutoff, others follow. They pass that demand to their own reports. They build a chain of bogus deadlines. Suddenly, every task claims urgency. Real asks vanish in the noise. Teams spend all day chasing tasks that do not really matter now. They lose sight of true priorities. Morale drops. People grow tired. They push back when mute notifications. Mails may stack up. When a true crisis hits, the team may not respond fast enough because they trained themselves to ignore all deadlines. When can you use false urgency? It works in a pinch, but use it like a safety valve, not a fire alarm. If a task has a low chance of delay, you might say, "Let's aim for tomorrow morning," to keep it on track. That phrasing still feels urgent, but it names a clear time. You drop the end-of-day bluff. You give a real hour. You keep trust. You reduce errors. You keep stress at bay. If you face a real need, be honest. Our client needs this by 2. That is final. If you inflate timeframes, you cheat yourself and your team. Think of false urgency as a tactic in behavioral psychology. You can combine it with context. If you show a list of tasks and place a fake "due today" tag on one, you shift focus. Human brains react to time threats. We set priorities by deadline. We ignore small tasks if no clock ticks. We race against a cutoff. We choose tasks that show a timer over tasks that don't. A fake deadline mimics that timer. It tells the brain to act. It sidesteps slower, calmer planning. Some roles depend on it. In sales or fundraising, you may need to push a client to decide. You might say, "This price holds until tomorrow," even if you can extend it. That tactic triggers a fast yes or no. It cracks open a stalled deal. You use false urgency sparingly. You keep a pulse on the client's real needs. You avoid cheap tricks. You drop the tactic if it backfires. If the client learns your price can stretch, they lose faith in every deadline you state. In personal life, false urgency pops up at home. A friend might text, "Need your RSVP by tonight for a party in 2 months." You scramble to check your calendar. You reply. Then you see you could answer next week with no harm. You feel tricked. You learn to wait until near the true date. You may ignore the next early ask because you do not trust the timing. The host loses early feedback. They feel blindsided when you answer late. They learn to set clear dates. They sacrifice early insights for honest timing. The result: both sides lose. Here is a scenario in project work. A project manager sends a note. "We need the draft slides by 5 this afternoon, though the client sees them next week." The analyst drops all work. They draft slides, proofread text, polish diagrams. They finish just before 5. They wait. The slides sit in an inbox. The client never sees drafts until next Tuesday. The analyst could have used that time for real work. The project manager could have asked for a Friday deadline. Then the analyst could have paced work across days, ask questions, and deliver higher quality. Instead, the rush risked well-informed decisions and fueled burnout. In design work, a creative director might ask, "Can you send a mock-up by end of day?" The designer locks in. They craft concepts, adjust pixels, test colors. They finish with a rough mock-up, submit it at 5 p.m. The director reviews it at 6 p.m. It misses key brand rules. The director asks for revisions. The designer repeats the process at night, all because a time frame felt short. If the director had said, "Can you send a first draft by Wednesday morning?" the team could digest feedback over lunch, avoid late hours, and deliver a stronger result. When you apply false urgency, you need to ask, what will it cost? Does the benefit outweigh the risk of mistrust? Does it matter if people grow numb to timing? Often, you can replace fake cutoffs with true ones. You can assign tasks based on real steps. You can say, "I need this before our meeting on Friday." That message links the deadline to an event. People see the need and act. You maintain respect. You avoid wasted effort and stress. Always test your phrasing. Ask whether a genuine deadline exists. If not, drop the cutoff or give a buffer. Offer time for feedback. Offer to help with hurdles. If your team sees why the task matters, they may act with real urgency. They will balance speed and quality. They will own the work. They will meet true deadlines without a bluff. They will trust your word. Examples show how false urgency bubbles up in all walks of life. When you hear it, speak up. Ask for clarity. Push back. You keep your time intact. You keep your mind sharp. You keep your quality high. You hold others to honest timelines. That makes real urgency work when it counts.
If you leave a wallet in a lost and found and return later to claim it, few people check. You drop a random item in a bin. You return as the finder. You ask for proof, but staff do not demand more than a quick description. They assume the real owner will come. They move on. That gap lets someone grab lost gear without suspicion. Think of a cafe. A barista picks up a leather wallet left on a table. They drop it into a drawer. No one logs the brand or color. Later, you walk in and say you found a lost wallet near the door. The barista shrugs and places it behind the counter. You leave. Hours pass. You return and ask if someone claimed it. They hand it over. You walk out with cash and cards. No one questions you. In a college, the lost and found sits in one office. Students file past folders and boxes. They leave jackets, textbooks, and USB drives. They lose interest in items that sit for days. If someone claims an item, staff may ask for a note or an ID card. But if a hustler says they lost it last week, they hand over the item based on that line. The real owner may never check. They assume the school will email them first. They never get an email. They stop looking. An airport creates more chances. You spot a camera bag by a lounge chair. You set it aside and leave the area. You watch from a distance, then return as the finder. You say you saw it near gate 12. The staff glance at your ID, but do not match the camera's serial number. They hand it over. They trust that travelers report lost items. They assume the real owner would describe a scratch or a case sticker. They skip those checks. On a subway, conductors toss lost umbrellas and phones into a clear plastic box. The box fills quickly. Riders expect the conductor to call if their item has a tag. Few riders check the box. If someone scribbles a number on a tag and claims the item, the conductor matches the number. They hand it over. That tag could match any item. The label lacks detail. It never notes the phone's wallpaper or the umbrella's pattern. Quiet trust lets hustlers walk off. Gyms hold lockers and benches. You see a wallet peek from a locker. You slip it into your bag. You carry it to the front desk and say you found it near the rowing machines. The staff ask for proof, but you describe any detail from a slip of paper inside. You claim you lost it in the locker room earlier. They hand it back. You leave with credit cards. You skip checks on the card names. They do not ask. Street fairs lack formal lost and found rules. A tent collects scarves and hats. A volunteer ignores small notes in the items. You place a designer scarf in the pile. You leave.
Hours later, you return and say you found it near the food trucks. No one asks for a receipt or a tag. They worry about clutter. They hand over the scarf. You walk away assured. On social media, someone posts a photo of a watch with no unique mark. They say they lost it at a soccer game. Many players respond. They say, "Mine looks like that." The poster asks for proof. "Send me a selfie wearing it." A hustler may scramble to fake a photo or write a confusing message. That filter weeds out liars. Without that filter, anyone could claim the watch and take it home. A library collects books and earbuds. A student leaves a notebook on a table. A librarian tosses it into a box. Weeks pass. A hustler walks in and asks, "Did anyone turn in a blue notebook with a gold cover?" The librarian recalls the description and hands it over. The hustler takes notes inside and leaves. The real owner never asked because they thought staff would call or email. They forgot to check the box. In an office, a coworker finds a badge key card. They drop it in a drawer. Later, a hustler asks for missing items. They describe wearing a red lanyard. The office manager hands over the badge. They do not check the photo ID on the card. They trust the story. The hustler leaves and sells the badge to someone who uses it at night. The office only revokes the badge after a break-in, long after the hustler moved on. At a college fundraising event, a raffle ticket roll goes missing. A hustler picks up the roll and writes a note claiming they spilled a drink. A volunteer hands the roll back. The hustler pockets winning tickets. They cash them in. No one matches the ticket numbers. They trust explainers. They fear upsetting donors. They skip deep checks. That missing diligence pays off for the hustler. Retail shops also lose items. In a small boutique, a designer scarf falls to the floor. An employee throws it in a bag with other lost goods. Later, a hustler returns and says, "I think I lost my scarf here last night." The clerk guesses the item and hands it over. The hustler leaves and sells it online. The store does not shelve lost items, so they cannot show a photo or tag. Staff trust you more than a system. In a hotel lobby, housekeeping collects room keys and wallets left in rooms. A hustler waits near the desk and claims they cleaned room 412. The clerk does not verify the guest list. They hand over the key and wallet. The hustler enters the room later and cleans out valuables. No one audits which staff pick up items or check receipts. That gap lets housekeepers or outsiders exploit simple trust. At a conference, organizers use a central lost bin. Attendees drop badges, pens, and USB sticks. A hustler visits after hours and slips in. They scan tags and note high-value items. They return the next morning as a frantic attendee. They show a business card with a wrong email. Organizers assume stress, hand over the item, and do not match details. The hustler walks away with data drives and sells the contents.
You face a stack of papers. They bear terms and dates and numbers. Someone asks you to sign now. You pause. You breathe. You say, "I'd like to sleep on this." That phrase feels small. It feels like a polite stall, yet it shifts the tower. You slow the process. You let doubt settle. You force the other side to show their hand. Imagine you sit in a car dealership. The salesman pushes a pen toward you. He says, "We can lock this price if you sign now." You smile and close the folder. You say, "I need to sleep on this." He blinks. He leans back. He frowns. He wants that sale today. He may offer a lower rate or add a perk. He hears the pause as a break in momentum. He hates that break. He worries you will walk. He fears you will call a rival. That pause can land you a better deal. Think of a job offer. The HR manager slides a contract across the desk. The salary, the bonus, the benefits. It looks tempting. Still, you lean back and say, "I'd like to sleep on this." She glances at her watch. She checks her notes. She nods. She thanks you for your candor. She lets you leave. Next morning, she calls you. She asks if you have questions. You mention health coverage and stock options. She may adjust the offer or confirm it remains valid. She shows you respect.
She sees you do not sign on impulse. You gain leverage to shape the terms. Picture a landlord who shows you a rental lease. It has rules on pets, utilities, termination fees, and renewal options. The folder feels heavy. The lease runs 12 pages. You flip through and see a clause on a security deposit. It seems high. You stand and say, "I'd like to sleep on this." The landlord nods. You walk away. That night, you call a friend who just moved out of a similar place. You compare notes on the landlord's habits. You spot a petty fee buried in the fine print. You return and ask the landlord to remove that fee. He may agree, he may say no. Either way, you avoid a blind spot that could cost you hundreds in a year. A vendor hands you a non-disclosure agreement. It protects their secrets and binds you. You spot a clause that keeps you from talking to your lawyer. You sense a trap. You push back. You say, "I'd like to sleep on this." That phrase buys time. You send the NDA to counsel. You ask a lawyer about the gag clause. Your lawyer tells you it is uncommon and one-sided. You can redline that section. The vendor may accept or resist. In either case, you act with knowledge, not fear. You avoid signing a contract that gives them too much power over your speech. In each scenario, the words "sleep on this" carry weight. They reveal you will not bend today. They give the other party a chance to rethink. They push negotiations into a new round. You gain breathing space. You avoid rash promises. You keep options open. You force clarity. People tend to fear empty time. They want closure. A pause threatens that sense of closure. They may then call you or email to follow up. They may sweeten the deal. They may reveal hidden costs. They may reveal urgency they did not share at first. Consider a freelance project. A client emails a statement of work. It lists tasks, deadlines, and payment schedules. You read it. You raise an eyebrow at a kill fee clause. You fear they can cancel at will and still bill you. You reply, "I need to sleep on this." They write back the next day. They erase the kill fee. They add a limit on changes. They tweak the scope. You sign a leaner statement of work. You avoid a lawsuit or a $0 invoice if they cancel. You owe no apology for taking extra time. In a business sale, you face a letter of intent. It sketches price, terms, and due diligence. You sense some points remain vague. You step away and sleep on it. You call a mentor over coffee. You ask about earnout formulas. You learn common traps. You spot a clause that ties half the purchase price to future revenue. You detail scenarios if revenue dips. You return and ask for a fixed fee instead. The buyer may adjust or walk away. If they walk, you avoid a gamble on revenue. If they adjust, you lock in a safer price. That pause, that night of thought, protects you from regret. In a wedding invitation to pay for a bridal shower gift, you feel a gentle nudge. The bride sends a link to an online registry. She hopes you will click now. You push back. You close the tab and sleep on it. You compare items. You find a gift under your budget that still feels personal. You write a note rather than spend a lot on crystal. You stand by your limits. You avoid guilt spending. You hold the bride's feelings in check with healthy boundaries. Say you shop online for a mortgage. You email the lender for an interest rate lock. The rate looks low. But you recall rates can spike by morning. You reply, "I'd like to sleep on this." You wake up and check the prime rate. You see a small uptick. You still lock in, but you now know the trend. If the rate had jumped, you might have asked to lock at a different level. That extra day saved you thousands over 30 years. In sales negotiations, lawyers teach this tactic. When a client sees a draft contract, the lawyer may say, "Let us review this overnight." Lawyers know opposing counsel will worry the request signals a flaw. They will scramble to call and defend the draft. They may water down a clause. They may tweak indemnification terms. They may offer a side letter, all because you paused.
A power dynamic shifts when you refuse to be hasty. The other side may think you harass them or test their patience, but real pros expect this move. They see it as a step in any deal. They approve. They value a partner who reads, questions, and revises. They avoid partners who sign too quickly and then sue. That caution brings respect. It shows you plan and protect your business from future storms. In real estate, you see a rental property listed with an open house on Saturday afternoon. Dozens show up. You talk with the landlord. He says he can hold the unit if you sign today. You feel a flicker of fear. What if someone signs ahead? You pause. You reply, "I need to sleep on it." You drive by at dusk. You notice noise from a nearby highway. You call the landlord and ask if he will drop the rent by $50. He does. That pause saved you money. You avoided a lease with 6 months of overpayment and late nights of horn blasts. Avoid ad hoc signatures in any domain. A vendor may hand you a credit agreement with a prepayment penalty. You think, this is fine. You scribble your initials. You think the lawyer can fix it later. You miss that once you initial, the rest of the deal flows. You lose leverage to remove the penalty. In that world, you lose control. A pause protects your rights. You remain free to revise or reject. When you meet with an online service provider, they may ask you to agree to terms and conditions without a clear scroll box. You hit "I agree." You never read the clause that binds your data to them permanently. You find out later that you cannot delete your history or cancel your account easily. If you paused and read, you could opt out or demand changes. You catch hidden auto-renewals or arbitration clauses. You avoid a long battle over customer support. Saying "I'd like to sleep on this" also reveals patience. Creativity and insight often come at night. You wake with fresh ideas. You catch errors. You spot numbers that do not add up. You recall a call where someone mentioned a side deal. You bring that up. You press for a credit or a concession. Clarity emerges after rest. You gain a sense of calm that fuels your best judgment. When you hold back on signing, you also manage expectations. The other side may lower their guard. They may slip their own terms. They may confess that they wrote that clause under pressure. They may admit they do not need it. They may mention a house rule that no one enforces. If it truly does not matter to them, they may strike it out. You win a small victory. You avoid a clause that would cost you later. Pause before signing anything. Place your pen down. Close the folder. Breathe. Tell them you need a night to think. Watch their eyes blink and shoulders sag. They may try to rush you back, but stick to your ground. That pause can change the shape of your deal. It can save you money, time, stress, or risk. It can help you craft terms that match your needs. It can lead to a contract where you feel strong, not trapped. It can keep you safe. In buying a small business, you may face a share purchase agreement. Lawyers call it an SPA. It lays out earnouts, warranties, and indemnities. You skim it. You think you grasp the key points. You say, "I need a night to review this with my accountant." The seller grits his teeth. He wants to close now. But you stand firm. You find a warranty that forces you to buy back inventory at a loss. You renegotiate. You drop that warranty. You focus on a simple asset purchase. You protect your cash. At every turn, the habit of pausing before signing pays off. It blocks hasty decisions. It forces detail into the light. It tests hidden motives. It gives you leverage to shape terms. It shows you take your obligations seriously. It signals you do not sign for fun. Others sense that calm confidence. They know you will not bend easily. They know you will walk if the deal feels off. They know you will sign only once you feel secure. That knowledge can shift leverage and yield a steadier, fairer result.